What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. It was nighttime in Konohagakure, which resided in the village hidden in the leaves. Lights of shops were rarely seen down the streets where markets were held, and barely any people were out. It was quiet, a little too quiet. And it was especially quiet in the Hyuga clan's compound, which was an unusual first for such a clan that was strict, stern, and punctual. No guards were about, which was also odd, and all of the lights were turned off. That is, except for one room that held a certain heiress in it. Hinata Hyuga had just woken up from a nightmare and was shaking like a leaf as she sat in her bed while clutching her blankets up over her nose. She had turned the lamp on and was looking around wildly to see if any monsters were about. She saw none and grabbed her favorite stuffed bear that was named Mr. Dai, and snuggled him against her chest. He was a big bear, almost the size of little 6-year-old Hinata herself, and his colors were very unusual for a bear. He was white as snow and had a large blue spot over his left eye. His arms were lengthy and reached all the way to his head, and he only had one ear. Hinata was playing surgery and amputated one of Mr. Dai's ears for a donation to the Sickly Bear Society. A place she made up, of course, thus weighting the stuffed animal of hearing with one ear. Hinata was scared and decided to go sleep with her mother instead of being all alone in her room. Her mother was Hitomi Hyuga, and she was a very pretty woman. She had fair skin accompanied with long dark eggplant hair that went slightly past her waist, and side bangs framing her face down to her shoulders. If you had seen Hinata with her mother, you could tell right away that they looked very much alike. Hinata swayed her legs over her bed and jumped down from it with a soft thud. Her peach-colored nighttime kimono swished as she regained her composure. She turned Mr. Dai's face so he could look at her. "You don't think mother will be mad if we slept with her, do you, Mr. Dai?" she asked him. She made the bear's head shake from side to side with her small, pale hands. Hinata smiled cutely and gave out a breath of relief. But it was short-lived once she thought of the other person that slept in the same room with her mother. "You don't think father will get mad, do you?" Her father, or known as Hiyashi Hyuga, was a very strict and stern man. He always trained Hinata hard in the arts of the Hyuga, and he had many duties as the head of the Hyuga clan. The brunette was sometimes afraid of her own father, but when her mother and her new sister Hanabi, that was recently just brought into the world a few months ago, would come to greet the two of them with bright smiles, her father would always mellow down and give her warm smiles as he told her to keep trying to do her best. Her father had long, black hair and featureless, white eyes, which was shared by all of the members of the Hyuga clan, for it was their Kekkei Genkei after all. Hinata looked at Mr. Dai as she waited for his answer. After a minute or so, the bear had shaken his head, courtesy of Hinata, of course. She let out the breath she hadn't realized she held in. "That's a relief. I thought father would get mad at me for sure. Let us go then." She quickly ran out of her room and down the halls to find where her mother and father slept. But unbeknownst to the young girl, there was a lurking figure that was following a few feet behind her with quiet steps. Hinata made it to her parents' room as she huffed from all of the running and excitement that was coursing through her young body. The reason why she was so excited was because she couldn't wait to see her mother again. Hitomi was a vital part in Hinata's life. Ever since the child was conceived, she had a special connection with her mother. She never complained, yelled, screamed, or fought her mother throughout her young life. Hinata loved her mother so much, she was willing to do anything for her. So as she slid open the door and entered the beautifully made tatami room, she quietly crept over to her mother's side of the futon mattress as she snuggled her bear tightly against her. Once she made it over to her, Hinata kneeled down by her mother's side and used Mr. Dai's lengthy arms to poke her mother's cheek. After a few pokes, Hitomi stirred awake and looked up groggily at her assaulter. "Hinata?" Hitomi yawned as she covered her mouth with a pale hand. "What are you doing awake, my flower?" Hitomi would always call Hinata flower because of the way she acted. Hinata was shy, thoughtful, serene, kind, and very polite person, and she was also a very gentle girl as well. Hitomi considered her a bud that had yet to blossom, and she was very proud to be called her mother. Hitomi loved Hinata very much, and she did not wanted her gentle nature to be diminished like all of the elders wanted. And Hitomi wanted Hinata to be strong in her own way and not the way the elders had wanted. The mother wanted her child to have freedom and not to be caged like most of the Hyugas were. So as long as she had a breath in her body, Hinata would continue to be she and not some robot that could be used for manipulation. Hinata blushed at the nickname her mother gave her. No matter how many times she said it, it just seemed that the Hyuga heiress couldn't stop herself from blushing, and she didn't know why. "Mama, I wish to sleep with you. Is that alright?" Hitomi smiled at her eldest daughter. "Of course you can, my flower. You can sleep with me anytime you want." Although, she turned and looked at the huge empty space that was beside her. "I do wish your busy father would stop working all the time and spend more time with us." She sighed. "Oh well, at least your little sister will have more company tonight." They both looked over to the crib that was not far from them. Hinata stumbled over to her baby sister eagerly as she looked through the crib's bars. She was very short for a 6-year-old and she couldn't quite reach the handles of the cribs yet. Hinata blushed slightly as she smiled at the small bundle the crib held within it. There, her little sister that was named Hanabi Hyuga, she lay as she slept peacefully in her sleep. Hanabi had brown short hair that would most likely grow darker once she had gotten older, a constant blush that stained her chubby cheeks, and closed white eyes that had a hint of lilac in them. "She's so cute," Hinata exclaimed as her blush tinted a bit darker. "She will be very pretty when she grows older. I bet she will be much more prettier than me, mama." Hitomi chuckled at Hinata's humbleness. It never ceased to amaze how her daughter always put others before herself. But she couldn't complain, after all, she was exactly the same way as well. "I don't know," she giggled, "I think, no, I know you will be very beautiful one day. Even more beautiful than myself, my dear." Hinata blushed horribly at her mother's praise. She stuffed her red face into her animal pal as she tried to hide her embarrassment. More beautiful than her own mother? She doubted it. After all, her mother was considered the most beautiful Hyuga in the entire Hyuga clan. The young heiress thought that she was absolutely no contest against her mother, therefore she always berated how she was in fact not cute and was plain and that she should just accept it. Before the brunette could answer, a nasty laughter broke Hinata's line of speech. "Well, isn't this touching?" A voice sneered at the two. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have business here that needs taking care of." Hinata and Hitomi jumped as they saw a figure lean against the door. It was a tall, slim man with dark eyes with lines underneath them, black hair and beard. He wore the older-styled flak jacket which had thick shoulder pads. His head was bandaged and a forehead protector Hinata didn't recognize covered his right eye. He wore a black suit of clothing and an obi around his waist. Hinata didn't know how this man was, but Hitomi knew full well who the man was. Hitomi quickly stood up, pulled out a kunai that hid in her white kimono's sleeve, and pushed Hinata behind her. She narrowed her eyes as she addressed the man. "Kumogakure ninja," she hissed. "Not only that, but you are the head ninja of Kumogakure, are you not?" He clapped as he started to slowly make his way over to the females, drawing out a kunai from his weapons pouch that was strapped on his waist as he did so. "Well done, I applaud your intellect. You Hyuga are truly the real deal." His sharp eyes suddenly turned cold with malice. "But you and I both know what I'm really here for." He pointed towards Hinata, who jumped in surprise and fear. "Give me the girl and no one gets hurt." Hinata started to shake like a leaf as she ripped her eyes slowly from the man to her mother, who stood rigid as a rock. Mama," she squeaked as she started to pull on her mother's beautifully white kimono. Why does he want me? Why?" The head's wife looked down at her eldest daughter and felt her heart rip in two. She absolutely hated it when she caused Hinata so much strife. But she needed her to be strong if she was going to make it out of here alive. "Hinata," she whispered, "I need you to listen to me. Go to the crib and get Hanabi out of here." The brunette's lavender-tinted eyes widened with fear. What about her mother? Was she going to be okay? Was she going to follow them? Would she make the bad man go away? She had to know, and she had to know now. What about why you mama? Are you coming out with us? She asked as tears threatened to spill down her cheeks. Hitomi gave Hinata a solemn smile as she nodded towards the young girl. "Of course, my flower. Now get going and get Hanabi out of here and warn your father." "Hurry now, hurry," she whispered softly. Hinata hesitated at first, but gave a small nod. She dashed as she made a run for her sister with clumsy but quick strides. The head of Kumogakure smirked as he watched the girl make a futile attempt to get away from him. I admire your bravery, you little brat. He laughed as he twirled his kunai on a finger, but you're coming with me. Before he could run over to Hinata, he felt a sharp pain slice through his cheek. He growled as he paid his attention back to the woman as she had her Byakugan activated and was standing in the Hyuga's rigid fighting style. Your fight is not with her but with me. And don't call my child a brat. It is you who act more childish than she does. Hitomi spat as she charged at him with smooth strides. The head ninja spat on the ground as he grinned at the woman running towards him. Fine, if you want it so badly, I'll give you a fight. And he too charged towards her. Hinata made it to her sister just as the babe began wailing at the noise commencing behind her. Hinata grabbed the safety latch and unhooked it. She then pulled down on the bars and the side of the crib slid down, completely revealing a venerable baby Hanabi. The whole time this was happening, Hinata was crying silent tears of woe and despair. She felt utterly helpless as her mother fended off the bad man that was trying to capture her. It didn't help that she was still glancing of her mother being momentarily overpowered, or how Hanabi cried at the commotion. Shush Hanabi, shush. Hinata tried to silence her sister with a wobbly voice. It's okay, Mama will. Hinata was suddenly cut off once she heard a sharp cry of pain slice through the air. But it wasn't a man's cry, it was a female's cry. Hinata whirled around as she saw her mother bleeding heavily from the various cuts and bruises she received from her attacks against the man. She was pressed against the wall as the man advanced forward. Even though he had the upper hand, the head ninja did also display his own injuries from their scuffle. One arm was hanging limp as he had deep wounds and cuts from Senbon Hitomi threw at him. Hinata watched helplessly as her shaking grew more and more. What should she do? What can she do? All of these questions constantly plagued her mind as the seconds rolled by and her mother's survival looked bleak. She should run away? Or should she fight? The young girl collapsed on her knees, gripped her head, and wailed pitifully as her uselessness took over. I can't do anything right. Hinata thought as her crying escalated and Hanabi's wails untied with hers. Because of me, Mama will. She's gonna. Hinata, said girl looked up as she saw her mother look up at her with a gentle smile stretched across her lips. I know you did your best and I'm very proud of you. But you must run and get your sister to safety. Run and tell someone what has happened. After that, you must hide. You must hide and survive. Hinata suddenly froze. To her, something felt wrong about that sentence. Like it wasn't supposed to sound like that. Run, hide, run and get someone else. Hide. She replayed those words over and over again until finally something snapped within her. The small child suddenly arose slowly on her 2 feet as her face morphed into an expression she has never shown before. Anger. No more hiding, she thought as she grabbed Mr. Dai by an arm. Her posture straightened, her head held high, and her lips started to droop as it turned into a frown. I'm not going to hide. I'm not going to run. I'm not going to leave Mama anymore. She suddenly started to narrow her eyes a little more as small veins started to pop around them. I will protect her and Hanabi. To protect Mama and Hanabi. The veins started to grow larger as her pale eyes started to see the insides of chakra networks. Is to protect my family. Byakugan. Hinata screamed and she threw her stuffed bear at the bad man's back to get his attention. The head ninja of Kumogakure willfully took the bait, but a second later, he wished he hadn't. Hinata had suddenly dashed at the man with incredible speed and delivered a chakra-encrusted palm into the man's stomach. He keeled over for a minute, but Hinata then started to give him jabs on random chakra points on his body. Hitomi watched with shock as her daughter took on a dangerous man 3 times her size. Hinata has awakened her Byakugan. She thought numbly as she could do nothing but sit there and watch her daughter fight. My daughter has awakened her Byakugan and is fighting the head ninja of Kumogakure right before my eyes. The head ninja was beginning to lose all feeling in his body as the child continued her onslaught of precise and painful chakra-encrusted attacks. He was being defeated by a mere child. He growled as the girl jabbed his solar plexus. He was the head ninja of Kumogakure, darn it. And he wasn't going to roll over for some pipsqueak. Before Hinata could hit the man's throat with a palm, he grabbed his kunai and sliced her cheek. She screamed in pain as she staggered away from the man and tried to stop the blood that was spilling out from her cut. Take this, you little urchin. He bellowed as he punched her on top of her head, leaving Hinata to crash to the floor and writhe in pain. But the older shinobi wasn't finished yet. He got up from his knees and stumbled over to the shy girl. Once he was on a side of Hinata, he started to violently kick the girl without mercy. "No, stop this at once," Hitomi cried as she tried to move her numb body but found out she could not. "Leave my daughter alone." The head ninja smirked as his kicks became more violent. "Hey, this will teach her to not mess with Kumoga." He didn't get the chance to finish his sentence once he felt an exploding pain shoot through his chest. The head fell to the floor next by Hinata with a heavy thud. Blood started to spill out of his mouth as the man's eyes rolled up into his skull. He was dead. "This will teach you to never hurt my daughter. Scum," a cold voice said as he picked up Hinata in his strong arms. Hitomi looked up with happiness and relief at her savior. "Hiyashi." The man looked over to his wife and instantly came over to her side. He wore a simple, white kimono, held closed by a dark-colored sash along with a brown, long-sleeved haori. Hiyashi started to examine his beloved's wounds as he looked at her with worried eyes. Hitomi laughed heartily at her husband's expression. "I am all right, my love. You have no need to worry." "No need to worry?" Hiyashi yelled at his wife. "I turn my back for 1 minute and what do I see? I see you and Hinata blooded and half-conscious while Hanabi's crib has been opened and she is crying. I have plenty of reasons to worry." "Hiyashi," Hitomi says sternly as she gets her husband's full attention, "I think the important thing is treating our daughter for her wounds." She then nods at the state Hinata was in. Blood was flowing from her scalp, down into her face as a nasty purple bruise appeared on her right cheek. Her pale arms were swollen and her body looked crumpled and paler than usual. When Hiyashi applied a little force on Hinata's ribs, her body twitched and her face contorted into a look of pain. "No doubt she has a few bruised ribs." Hiyashi sighed and gave in to his wife's demands. Not long after that, a few branch member guards ran in looking rather unnerved and weary. They had awoken from their slumber once they heard scuffling and the sound of 2 bodies thumping against the floors. "Lord Hiyashi, what has? Get my brother in here immediately." Hiyashi barked as he interrupted the branch member. They nodded curtly and quickly filed out, leaving Hiyashi to tend to his daughter and wife's wounds as much as he could. After a few minutes, a man that looked identical to Hiyashi came in. His name was Hizashi Hyuga and he was the identical twin of his brother. He had long, black hair and featureless, white eyes. But the thing was, he had the trait called the caged bird seal that was implanted on his forehead and shared by all of the branch members of the Hyuga clan. He wore a long-sleeved, loose-fitting kimono held closed by an obi, which seemed to be the common attire of the clan. "Hiyashi, what is the—" Hizashi stopped dead in his tracks once he saw the state of his sister-in-law and his niece were in. His white eyes grew filled with worry as he quickly went over by his brother's side. What has happened here? Who has done this? The mangy culprit is over there." Hiyashi growled as he pointed towards the dead ninja. His twin brother narrowed his eyes as he registered the man's identity. "I see. He was after the Byakugan, wasn't he?" Hizashi asked Hitomi. The woman nodded and began to feel tired. "Hi. He tried to take Hinata's eyes but I was able to intercept him, but I did not keep him at bay long enough for you to show up, Hiyashi." Hitomi explained to her 2 dearest men. The brothers pulled the same look of an eyebrow lifting simultaneously. "What do you mean by that?" they asked in unison, making Hitomi laugh heartily. She smiled as she looked down at Hinata's mangled body. Hiyashi managed to stop the bleeding, but they needed professional help. It wasn't anything dire, but it still needed to be treated. "I am saying that Hinata was the one that provided the diversion long enough for you to get here, my loves." Hiyashi and Hizashi's pale eyes widened in utter surprise. It was the same for the other branch members that were also present in the room. Hinata had severely damaged the head ninja of Kumogakure? But she was only a child, surely this was some misunderstanding? They were about to be in for another surprise when Hitomi addressed the 2 men again. Hitomi winced as she brought up an arm to stroke Hinata's dark blue hair. Hiyashi protested at first but stopped once he saw the loving and proud look on his wife's face. "Can you believe it, Hiyashi, my dear?" "Believe what?" Hitomi giggled. "That our beloved daughter has stood up to a man that was ranked head ninja of Kumo, but not only that. Hinata activated her Byakugan. Can you believe it? She actually activated her Byakugan at such a young age. That really settled in the surprises that day." Hiyashi's mouth went slightly agape as Hizashi's eyes widened again before he started to chuckle. He placed a reassuring hand on his brother's shoulder. Well, it seems that my son has some catching up to do, right brother? Hisashi smiled warmly as he gently took Hinata out of his arms. Come on, let's go get these two taken care of, he said as he started to carry Hinata out of the room. Hisashi could only nod numbly as he carefully scooped his wife into his strong arms and stagger right behind his brother. The whole way he was confused while his wife was just giggling at his expense. All the while this was happening, he only had one thought circling around his head. What just happened? Hiruzen Sarutobi, or formerly known as the third Hokage, was smoking his pipe as he assessed the situation right in front of him. The Hyuga clan head with his brother and 5 other members were standing rigidly awaiting further commands. It had been 5 days after the assault on the Hyuga clan by Kumo, and they were more tense than ever. The whole compound was surrounded by guards day in and day out, surveying every little detail into every known place. They constantly switched guards every 5 hours or so, and the clan was sharpening their skills with newfound vigor. Ever since Hinata and Hitomi had been injured in their scuffle with a dangerous man, the whole clan has been on unrest. The branch family was doing their best not because they were ordered to do so, but because they wanted to. Hinata and her mother were always kind to the branch family and tried to help out with anything they could if the opportunity showed up. And for that, the lesser branch were immensely grateful to them. Hiruzen blew out a ring of smoke before addressing the stern clan. Tell me Hisashi, how is Hinata and Hitomi doing? The old Hokage watched as the clan head's eyes relaxed a little while the rest of his body remained as strong as a rock. Very well, thank you. Hitomi is making a full recovery while Hinata is as well, but she will be having some signs of the fight still showing on her body for a few weeks. He replied curtly. Hiruzen smiled. He always did like to see the little heiress. He rarely saw her, but when he did, he was always amused at how shy the girl was. It had taken some time, but the third had managed to make the girl approach him without hesitation. On occasions, she would even run up to him and give him a hug before returning back in between her parents and having her father scold her on how that was not appropriate. Wonderful news, he said with his smile growing wider. I take it you will be letting some battle scars stay, am I correct? Hisashi gave the Hokage a rare smile. You already knew that, didn't you, so why ask? The Sandame gave a raspy laugh. Just because I'm old doesn't mean I can't have a little fun. After a few moments the Hokage's facial expression turned serious. Hisashi immediately took the hint and steeled his eyes. I have some news, Hisashi. News pertaining to the Kumo incident. Hisashi knew that this day would come and prepared for it accordingly and was ready to make the necessary arrangements for whatever Kumogakure threw at him. But he wasn't ready for what fate had in store for him. We have told them what has happened over here and they were quite furious. So furious, that they demanded that you give them something in return for your supposed transgressions you have committed on them. The Hokage began as he puffed another cloud of smoke. Hisashi tensed as he waited for the Hokage's reply. When the old ninja didn't reply, Hisashi became impatient. And those demands are, the Sandame inhaled deeply before addressing his audience again. He linked his fingers together as his facial expression became serious. They demand, the death of you Hisashi Hyuga. A ninja for a ninja per se. Hinata was merrily chasing Mr. Dai as the stuffed bear ran away from her. They were in a meadow full of flowers with the sun shining high and the sky clear of clouds. Hinata was having a wonderful time as she chased her beloved stuffed animal as they played a game of tag. Wait up Mr. Dai, Hinata screamed happily as she started to steadily gain on her friend. Wait for me, no way, you've got to catch me first. The bear teased as he started to get farther and farther away from her. Hinata giggled as she continued running, but felt tired once she couldn't find the strength in her legs to push on. She watched helplessly as her animal pal ran farther and farther away until he couldn't see him anymore. Hinata jumped once she felt the meadow give way under her feet and she started to fall into a black abyss of darkness. She watched with fear as the sun and the sky melted away and the color of pure black filled her line of vision. She screamed as she continued to fall down, down, down. Hinata snapped her eyes open and jerked her body up in the air. She panted heavily as she looked around with wide, scared eyes. Hinata, calm down sweetie, I am here. Please be still my flower. A familiar yet soothing voice called out to the young girl. Hinata's eyes adjusted to the bright light as she looked around the room. It had white walls with white tile flooring. Hinata saw a chair and heard a soft beeping that resounded throughout the room. It smelled like medicine and chemicals, and it made the brunette's nose wrinkle at the smell. She immediately knew she was in the hospital. The brunette shakily turned her head over to see her mother sitting up in the bed next to her. She was covered with gauze and bandages, but she was smiling at Hinata nonetheless. "It's good to see you up, Hinata. Are you okay? Did you have a bad dream?" her mother asked her. Hinata just responded with her eyes watering before she broke down crying. She wailed as she tried to wipe away her tears with her tiny fists, but the young heiress found out that she couldn't stop herself from crying. Hitomi's eyes looked crestfallen as she watched her eldest daughter cry. She cringed as she forced herself out of bed. She made her way over to her daughter with wobbly steps before placing her bottom down on the side of the bed with a heavy whump. She outstretched her arms and wrapped them around Hinata. The 6-year-old gripped her mother's hospital garments hard as she cried into her chest. Hitomi smiled gently as she began to stroke her daughter's hair with soothing strokes. "It is okay, my sweet, you have done nothing wrong. Why, if you had not fought that man, I would surely not be here before you right now. You should be very proud of yourself." Hinata continued to cry as she listened to her mother's words. She had done nothing wrong? But she had caused her mother so much pain, she didn't even want to look at herself. Hinata had noticed the way she had come over to her. She was hurt and there wasn't a thing the brunette couldn't do about it. So Hinata cried, but she cried with sorrow and guilt. Sorrow for her mother's pain, and guilt for her own weakness and how she wasn't strong enough to prevent those wounds from happening. The young heiress' mind suddenly brightened with an idea. She wasn't strong now, but if she could train herself, then maybe, just maybe, she could prevent this from ever happening again. Hinata felt her cries subside until it was nothing more than a few whimpers here and there. She lifted her head up to look at her mother with wet, red, lavender-tinted eyes. "Mama," Hinata began, I want to get stronger so that I can protect you the next time a bad person comes." Hitomi smiled down at her soon-to-be look-alike. She knew this day would come, but she had thought it would come in a much less scary fashion for her young daughter. "Well, my flower, there is a way for that to happen, you know," she said as she poked Hinata's little red nose. Hinata's eyes grew into small saucers. "Are really? How, mama? Why the Ninja Academy, of course." Hitomi giggled at her eldest daughter's expression. Hinata tilted her head in confusion. Ninja Academy? This was the first time she had ever heard of that. Hitomi giggled and snuggled her daughter closer as she began to explain. "Hi, the Ninja Academy is where young children, like you," she poked Hinata's nose again, and this time it made the girl giggle, "train in order to become shinobi of the Hidden Leaf Village. Once you have passed your 3rd year there, you will be promoted to the rank of genin and will start your career as a ninja of the leaf." It sounds pretty exciting, doesn't it? Hinata's eyes went wide after she heard her mother's revelation. There was an academy where she could train to be a ninja? Well, sure, she was already training as a ninja in the Hyuga arts, but the young heiress had no idea that there was a school for children who wanted to be shinobi. And since it provided Hinata with just the golden opportunity she was looking for, she eagerly took it. Hi, I would like to join this ninja academy." Hinata squealed as she began bouncing on the bed. "Oh, please, may I, mother? May I?" Hitomi laughed at her daughter's behavior once more and scooped her little bundle into her arms before she began nuzzling Hinata with her nose. "Of course you can, my precious flower. We just need to get your father's consent as well and you'll be good to go. I heard that the academy will be opening in about a month's worth. We'll have plenty of time to get you prepared and ready for school." "Oh, this is so exciting." And after that, they began talking with Hitomi, mostly explaining what Hinata will be learning at the academy and how they will prepare her for it. Hiyashi, Hizashi, and the batch of branch members that were chosen to accompany them were walking down the hospital halls to where Hinata and Hitomi resided. Hiyashi was very distraught and his steps were heavy and not swift and brisk. He was contemplating everything the Sandame had discussed with him. He was going to have to die for something Kumo had caused? It was ludicrous and it just didn't add up. But he had no authority over the situation, for he was not a cage. So for now, he tried to think of some way to alter his path of demise. "Brother." Hiyashi looked up to see Hizashi looking in deep thought. His face contorted into different emotions of confusion to determination. "Yes, Hizashi?" His identical twin looked at him with resolve blazing in his all-seeing eyes. "Let me do it." Hiyashi stopped in his tracks as well as everyone else. Hiyashi looked at his brother with shocked eyes. What did you say? You can't honestly mean that, can you, Hizashi? Hizashi sighed before he turned around to face his older brother. He knew this day would come where he would have to sacrifice himself to protect his brother, as it was the duty of the lesser branch's job to protect the main with their lives. Hiyashi, do you know what it is like to bear the caged bird seal? It is demeaning and we are helpless to its power. By sacrificing myself I have a chance at freedom. I can finally be free of this accursed seal and not have to feel its wrath ever again. It is my wish to do this. But what about Neji? Surely you wouldn't leave your own son, would you? Hiyashi protested. Before Hizashi could answer, they all suddenly heard a door slid open. All of the Hyugas turned to see little Hinata standing by the hospital door with a small hand still gripping the handle. Hinata? Hiyashi and Hizashi both said simultaneously. Hinata was staring at her father and uncle with mortification written all over her round face. She had heard everything her uncle Hizashi had said. Sacrificing? Freedom? Caged bird seal? Suddenly, it all came crashing down on her once she remembered the night before. She realized that the head ninja of Kumogakure was a much-known man throughout the shinobi nations. Her memory was still fuzzy, but she could remember her father hitting the man before he lay still. So when she heard the conversations and saw the tired looks upon her relatives, she immediately knew what was happening. Hinata was very young, but she wasn't stupid. She limped over to her father and uncle's sides, still feeling the effects from yesterday's scuffle. She grabbed onto each of their robes and pulled on it to get their attention. Yes, Hinata? What is it that you want? Hiyashi asked his daughter as he kneeled by her with his eyes displaying kindness. The young heiress looked down for a moment before looking up at her father with determined eyes. I know this is not my place, father, but why don't you use a kadvi, a kadev, a counterfeit body in your place? All of the other Hyugas present widened their eyes with surprise and shock. Hiyashi turned to look at his brother, just as he turned to look at him. They both shared the same thought. When had Hinata become so smart? Do you think it will work, Hiyashi? Hizashi asked him. He did want to sacrifice himself, but he felt that he had much more things to be done before that could ever happen. Plus, he couldn't help but feel that Hinata would have such a great impact on the Hyuga clan, and that it could change it for many generations to come. Hiyashi pondered the situation. A counterfeit body could work, but how would they make it look exactly like him? As if she could read his thoughts, Hinata spoke up once more. You could use makeup to make it look more like you, and put layers of hard-to-break-through genjutsu over the body so no one could suspect a thing. Hinata looked at the ground as she began to shuffle her feet. But the problem is, how can the genjutsu not be detected from well-trained shinobi? Hiyashi looked at his daughter incredulously. When had she learned about genjutsu? He certainly did not teach it to her. He didn't even explain the concept to her. He grabbed onto Hinata's shoulders and looked the shy girl straight in the eyes. Hinata, who told you about genjutsu? Hiyashi demanded. Hinata looked into her father's eyes for a split second before refocusing back to the ground with a flustered face. Mama told me. She said it was something I was going to learn about once I went into the Ninja Academy. The Ninja Academy? Hiyashi screamed and he stormed into the hospital room while he was dragging poor Hinata along with him. He stomped right in front of Hitomi, who had not moved from her spot. Hitomi, did you tell Hinata about the Ninja Academy? Hitomi folded her hands neatly in her lap as she looked up at her fuming husband with calm, collective pale eyes. Hiyashi, you knew this day would come, my husband. You need to accept that our little Hinataheim is more than ready to embrace the art of the ninja. Wouldn't you agree? Hiyashi sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Yes, it does seem that Hinata has experienced more than what a normal 6-year-old would have, but what with the crisis at hand now and the suggestion of genjutsu over the body? Hitomi raised a brow. Body? What are you talking about, my love? Hiyashi sighed and began to relay what happened with the meeting with the Hokage and Hizashi's declaration. Hitomi was mortified at first, but slowly her mind began to ponder over the situation at hand. After a brief moment of silence, the beautiful woman spoke again. I see, that is actually not a bad idea. And I know just the person who can be able to distribute such a high-class genjutsu. Really? Who might that be? Hiyashi asked. At that remark, his wife looked at him and gave him a small mischievous smile. He instantly knew what she was implying and sweat began to formulate on his neck. Oh, her. Young 15-year-old Kurenai Yuhi was sitting at a dango shop as she ate her dango. She had long, black, shoulder-length untamed hair, and very unique eyes that are red in color, with an additional ring in them. And she wore the standard leaf ninja gear, which consisted of a green flak jacket with a red maelstrom in the middle of the back, regular shinobi sandals, and a forehead protector that was placed firmly on her forehead. Kurenai was considered a genjutsu specialist because of her advanced genjutsu that she could pull off when many other shinobi couldn't. Even though she was a chunin, many ninja that were in the village showed her great respect, which she hated very much. Right now, she was just waiting for her friend, Anko Mitarashi, to get here so they could have a girls' day. Funny how fate could be cruel to those that didn't even know they were about to be dragged into something big. Kurenai blinked when a ninja appeared in front of her. But it was no ordinary ninja or anbu, no, it was a Hyuga. And by the looks of it, it seemed the guy was very unnerved by something. Miss Kurenai, Lord Hiyashi requests your presence at the hospital in room number 203 immediately. He said quickly. Kurenai blinked again and pulled out the dango stick that was in her mouth. What for? The Hyuga messenger started to fidget a little before remaining rigid once again. Now the genjutsu mistress was really interested. I cannot say it out loud in public, nor do I have the permission to do so. Lord Hiyashi will explain everything once you get there. It is imperative that you come, Miss Kurenai. Kurenai sighed and began to twirl her dango stick between her fingers. Well, since Anko isn't going to come, I might as well. It's not like I have anything else better to do while I sit here. She stood up and followed the messenger back to the hospital with brisk strides. Kurenai slid open the door to room number 203 and walked in to find that all of the Hyugas were awaiting her. She was surprised but masked it well as she went to go discuss with the group. So you called me? What's this about Lord Hiyashi? She asked in a curt manner. Hiyashi sighed as he addressed the genjutsu mistress. Ah yes, hello Kurenai. A voice addressed the young teen with a happy manner. Kurenai craned her neck to see her favorite adult Hitomi Hyuga. Ever since the girl was little she had looked up to Hitomi and her skills as a ninja. So when she saw her role model all banged up and hurt, you can bet the genjutsu specialist was worried. Kurenai quickly made her way over to Hitomi and grabbed one of the woman's hands as she fretted over her. Miss Hitomi, what happened to you? Did someone hurt you? Why, if I ever ran into the person who did this, I'm gonna. She stopped once she saw a little girl, no more than 6 maybe, pull on Hitomi's robes. She looked at Kurenai with big, curious eyes as she stood beside her role model. Who's the squirt? Hitomi laughed at Kurenai's attention span. With teens it was always one thing that quickly led to another in a matter of seconds. Why Kurenai, this is my daughter Hinata Hyuga. Surely you can see the comparison between her and me? Kurenai's red eyes widened in shock as she looked between Hitomi and her daughter. She noticed that there were in fact similarities between the woman and the little girl. Wow, Kurenai breathed as she kneeled down to the heiress height. Hinata squeaked and tried to hide behind her mother's legs as she observed the chunin shyly. I never knew. Hey there kid. Kurenai greeted as she waved at Hinata. Hinata blushed as she tried to make herself more invisible to the teenager. Kurenai couldn't help but snort at the brunette's antics as Hitomi laughed at Hinata's behavior also. Well, she seems a bit shy. Kurenai chuckled as she began scratching a cheek with a finger. Ahem. A voice interrupted the two young women. They turned to see Hiyashi looking very miffed that he was ignored completely. If you're all finished, I would like to move on to important matters please. Kurenai rolled her eyes as she stood up and faced the stern man. Ah yes, please continue Lord Hiyashi. Hiyashi nodded and began telling Kurenai about the Hyuga incident. Kurenai was appalled at what happened and became angry at the head of Kumo of what he did to a shy girl like Hinata. She didn't know the girl, but no kid should be treated like that, no matter what caliber they uphold. So when Hiyashi told the plan Hinata had come up with, Kurenai was surprised at the cleverness the kid had. But she was also a bit happy that the girl had displayed such an ingenious plan. For now, the young Yuhi covered her emotions as she readdressed the Hyuga's clan head. It does seem like a good plan. Kurenai sighed and then shrugged. Oh what the heck, I'll give it a shot. All of the Hyugas looked relieved that the genjutsu mistress had willingly agreed to their terms. They thought it was going to be difficult at first, but it was a surprising turn of events that went greatly in their favor. "Thank you very much Kurenai," Hiyashi said with a small smile. "You have no idea how much this means to us." Hizashi nodded as he agreed alongside his big brother. He put a reassuring hand on the clan head's shoulder as he gave Kurenai a small smile of approval as well. "Yes, you have saved a life this day." Kurenai nodded curtly to them. She was ultimately surprised at the rare signs of emotion the Hyuga brothers were displaying. Usually, it was only Hitomi that ever displayed any emotion at all in the Hyuga compound, as far as the Genjutsu mistress knew. But she had never in her life seen the two brothers show any emotion between each other, or to others. She felt a small body brush past her and saw little Hinata run up to the two males and grab onto their houris with her small, pale hands. Kurenai watched as the young heiress gave the two brothers a toothy smile and they, in turn, gave her smiles that were full with happiness. Both of them patted her head and Hinata began to giggle. Kurenai felt her mouth go agape as she watched the whole scene unfold right in front of her very eyes. She felt someone tug on her arm and turned around to see Hitomi smiling brightly at her. "It's amazing, isn't it?" she said as she watched her daughter bounce up and down excitedly as she began to chat animatedly with Hiyashi and Hizashi. "She has brought so much relaxation in the Hyuga compound in a matter of days. I have never seen Hiyashi and Hizashi look so happy with each other." Kurenai nodded and looked at the two men. "Yes, it seems your daughter has done the impossible. Pretty neat kid you've got there, Hitomi." Hitomi giggled and a small blush graced her cheeks. "Yes, it seems I have." She looked down at her hands for a moment before looking back up at Kurenai again. "Kurenai, I wish for you to teach my daughter." Yuhi almost face-faulted once she heard that. Where did that come from?" Hitomi looked at the Genjutsu mistress sternly. "You are going to enter the Jonin exams, right?" Kurenai felt sweat begin to formulate on her neck. "Well yes, but then you will be able to teach a Genin team, correct?" Hitomi was getting excited. If she could get Hinata on Kurenai's team, then she knew Hinata would be much happier and learn a thing or two from one of her precious people. "Hitomi," Kurenai sighed, "the Genin team selections are completely at random. I can't do anything about it. It's up to the Hokage to decide on the teams." Hitomi hung her head in despair and Kurenai felt guilt begin to well up inside of her. She sighed again and looked at Hinata. The 6-year-old was being swinged back and forth courtesy of Hiyashi and Hizashi. She was laughing and had a small blush on her face. Kurenai felt something twinge inside of her as she had felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt warm. There was something about that girl, that little Hyuga before, that made her feel alive again. Yuhi felt herself relax as her face morphed from a look of sternness into a look of happiness. "But maybe I'll try to reason with the Sandame when the time comes," she said, faking a look of annoyance. She glanced at Hinata again and her innards felt that warmth again. Quote ellipsis. Just maybe. The next day arrived and Kurenai was already at the Hyuga compound. She had just met up with one of the Hyuga guards and went into the family's tombs. She went along with Hiyashi, Hizashi, and Hitomi and had to find the freshest body they could find. After that, the plan went along smoothly. Kurenai put one of her strongest jutsu over the body that was nearly impossible to break even for someone like her. A few days went by and it was time for the transaction. Hizashi and some of the select Hyuga he picked out went to give the body at the Hidden Leaf Village's main gates. The Kumo ninja were already waiting and inspected the body once the casket was set down before them. "Is this Hiyashi Hyuga?" one Kumo ninja asked with an emotionless tone. Hizashi narrowed his eyes. He had to play the part of being angry so their plan wouldn't fail. The real Hiyashi was laying low in the Hyuga compound while his brother took on the part of participating in the transaction. "Yes it is. I hope you Kumo are happy. It seems your constant complaining and contempt for others has put an imbalance to the Hidden Leaf." Hizashi spat. The Kumo ninja just grinned at Hizashi's anger. The 4 ninja picked the casket and disappeared in a swirl of wind. They said one thing before they left. "Thank you for your cooperation, Leaf Ninja." After a few seconds, Hizashi retracted his Byakugan he had activated as soon as the guests left. He smiled and stuffed his hands into his sleeves. He led the other branch members back to the compound with a calm pace. "No, thank you," Hizashi said quietly to himself. It was a wonderful morning in the village hidden in the leaves. The birds were singing, the woodland creatures were scurrying about, and the people in the village were bustling around, full of activity. But for one clan, it was extraordinarily wonderful, and one little Hyuga was absolute bouncing with energy for the first time in her young life. Little Hinata Hyuga, who was only 6 years old, was bouncing in her spot as a few branch member females were drying her up from her recent bathing. They had a hard time keeping the little girl still since she kept trying to writhe out of their grip. Please Lady Hinata," one female exclaimed as she held the young girl's shoulders down. "You must be still or else we'll never get your clothes on." "But I want to go to the Konoha Ninja Academy now." Hinata pouted as she wriggled around in the young woman's grip. She managed to get free and slip under the female's arm. Hinata giggled as she headed for the door, planning to run away in all her glory. Lady Hinata," all of the branch members exclaimed, astonished at the young girl's display of vulgar behavior. Before Hinata could even get out of the room, she bumped into a solid figure that made her fall back on her bottom hard. She looked up to see her mother's smiling face while little girl rubbed her sore butt cheeks. "Mama," she beamed as she got up and jumped into her mother's arms. Hitomi laughed at her daughter, who was in the nude, and laughed even harder once she saw the female branch members' worn out and distressed expressions. "I take it that she has caused you some trouble?" Hitomi asked, stifling her giggles. They all nodded exasperatedly as their knees wobbled. They looked like they were going to collapse any second now. But one sole female walked up to Hitomi and Hinata, trying to mask her tiredness. "Yes, milady. We were quite shocked when Lady Hinata displayed a very exuberant side to us this morn." Hitomi raised an eyebrow. "Oh really?" She then looked at her eldest. Hinata caught her mother's gaze and tried to hide her blushing face into her mother's kimono. Hitomi wore a long-sleeved, loose-fitting, dark purple kimono that was held closed by a light purple obi. The Hyuga matriarch let out a playful sigh and stroked her daughter's silky dark blue hair. "Well then, I think you lovely women should take a break now. I will take care of our little troublemaker here." The women hesitated but complied to their matriarch's wishes nonetheless. They all filed out the room while Hitomi set Hinata on the bed and started to put on the little girl's clothes. "I take it you are excited about your first day at the academy?" Hitomi asked as she held out Hinata's panties and waited for the girl to finish slipping them on. "You don't usually act so willy-nilly, not that it is a bad thing of course." Hinata blushed heartily as she began slipping on her shirt. But before she could slip her another arm in another sleeve, her mother stopped her. "Oh, I almost forgot." Hitomi quickly went into the bathroom and came out moments later with gauze. "I need to wrap this around your chest, sweetie. Your ribcages are not quite fully healed yet, so we have to keep it bandaged up to reduce stress on it and keep it aligned if necessary." "Yes, Mama." Hinata complied and took off her shirt. It was true, since Hinata has still been feeling the effects of her scuffle with a dangerous man 1 month ago. It wasn't dire, it was just sore, and another reason being as to why she can still feel it, is that Hinata's physical appearance was very weak for her age. She was born a premature babe after all, and the doctors told her not to stress her body too much after her monthly physical examinations. But Hinata still trained in the Hyuga arts, pushing her body to the limit. It was amazing she could fight, let alone train. Hitomi began to wrap up her little daughter's torso and then wrapped both of her arms. She then pulled out some bandages and dressed her face as much as she could. Hiyashi had ordered that some scars be stitched as to show people of her battle wounds. So Hiyashi had the cut on his daughter's cranium, that the head of Kumo kicked, be stitched together. One more bandage, and, there. Hitomi mused as she admired her work. "You're all bandaged up, my flower. Would you like to go see in the mirror?" "Yes, please." Hinata beamed and quickly hopped off of the bed and bounced over to the long, vertical mirror that was placed by the bathroom door. Hinata saw that her less than swollen cheek had a cloth that was bandaged to her face. Her cheek scar that resided on her other cheek was healing quite nicely and was covered by a long brown bandage, and a small tan band-aid was dotted right in the center of her forehead. You could see it if you lifted up her bangs. "Wow," Hinata breathed as she admired her battle scars. She suddenly turned around and looked at her mother timidly while she poked her 2 index fingers together. "Why, you don't think anyone would think I look weird in this, right, Mama?" Hinata asked. Hitomi sighed through her nose and went over to comfort her eldest child. "No, I think that the others would think you have done something very dashing, which you have, and also have the scars to prove it." She hugged the young heiress tightly in a motherly embrace. And besides, it doesn't matter what people think of you on the outside, it is the inside that counts, my dear. Do not forget that, my flower. Hinata nodded as she snuggled up in her mother's embrace. The young girl always felt safe in her mother's arms. She knew that as long as her mother was supporting her, she could do anything. It was a little later in the morning and Hinata was being escorted by her uncle, Hisashi Hyuga, and his son, Neji Hyuga. Neji was very nice to Hinata and she was nice to him in turn. Ever since Hisashi had told his son of the day that Hinata had saved his life, Neji has been exponentially nice to the shy Hyuga heiress. Neji had recently gotten branded but he didn't seem to care. He was glad that he was serving Hinata, Hitomi, and Hiyashi. Not only were they nice to him, but Hinata would call him Big Brother Neji whenever the elders of the clan weren't around. Of course the young 7-year-old lad was embarrassed and he kept berating Hinata to never call him that, but secretly he was glad that the young girl thought of him so highly. Right now, as they were making their way towards Konoha's Ninja Academy, Hinata was rambling on and on about what the academy was like and how she would try to make herself stronger even though she thought of herself to be weak. Hinata was wearing something different than her usual Hyuga traditional kimono garb. Since she was going out and about the streets of Konoha, she decided to wear something that would help her freely move around since she would be training as a shinobi of the Hidden Leaf very soon. She wore brown capri pants, blue sandals, and a dark green, hood-less jacket with a fire symbol on the upper right side of her chest. Neji wore a black mesh shirt that had a fishnet undershirt, black movable pants and the standard blue sandals, a black scrunchie that held the end of his long dark brown hair, and gauze that was wrapped tightly around his forehead. Big Brother Neji, do you think the teachers will be nice or mean? Oh, and do you think I will make any friends? Will there be bullies there? At the last question, Hinata's nose crinkled as if she had smelled something that was rotting. Neji blushed at the nickname again. Lady Hinata, for the last time I am not your big brother. Why do you even call me that? Hinata shrank a little and began playing with her fingers as a small, embarrassed blush came across her cheeks. I've always wanted to have a big brother and you're sort of like a big brother and Papa and Uncle Hisashi are brothers, so. I thought. She trailed off as her blush grew on her face. Hisashi was surprised. He surprised that Hinata had never told anyone of her desires of having an older sibling but mostly because Hinata called Hiyashi her Papa. As far as the head of the branch house knew, Hinata never called Hiyashi Papa. She called him father majority of the time she has ever mentioned him. I have a feeling Hiyashi will be elated that Hinata is much more open with him now. Hisashi thought as he smiled down at the girl warmly. This revelation just proves it. Neji sighed through his nose and slapped a palm to his forehead. He was still sporting a blush but it had gone down to a smaller one now. Fine, but please don't use it in public. It would seem unnatural for a main branch member, the heiress no less, to call a lesser branch member their big brother. He didn't know why, but Neji was a big sucker for Hinata. He had a major soft spot for her and he couldn't bring himself to completely crush her naive ways. Hinata nodded as she looked at him determinedly. Hi, big brother Neji. She almost shouted and a few of the villagers turned to look in their direction from the mild commotion. She didn't even listen to a word I said. Neji grumbled as his blush washed over his face at full force now. His father on the other hand, was laughing heartily at his son's expense. He had no idea Neji could turn that color of red. His son kept himself isolated and didn't even want to interact with the few children that the Hyugas had in the compound. So you could image Hisashi's delight when he saw his son and niece getting along brilliantly. After a few more yards of walking, and a few more yells and beratings from an annoyed Neji, the Hyuga entourage finally arrived at Konoha's Ninja Academy. Already there were parents dropping off a few kids of their own and the children were running in the building excitedly as they went to fulfill their dreams as ninja. Alright, Lady Hinata, Neji, Hisashi said, gaining the two children's attentions. He suddenly reached into his kimono and pulled out 2 bento boxes. Here is your boxed lunches for the day. Please do not eat them until your teacher instructs you to do so. Do I make myself clear? Hi, they both answered in unison. Alright then, Hisashi smiled and took one of their hands into his own. Let's get you 2 inside, the bell will ring any minute. And with that, the man began leading the 2 Hyuga children into the learning facility. Hinata was walking with her uncle down the academy's hallways with a little bit of nervousness etching her features. They had recently dropped off Neji to his assigned class. The boy wasn't at all nervous, being this was his second year at the academy and he was an upperclassman than his cousin Hinata. So either way, Hinata and Neji would be together but in different classes. Hinata looked at her uncle, wondering if he's ever been nervous before. "Uncle Hisashi? Yes, Lady Hinata?" Hisashi answered her while his eyes remained forward. Even though he wasn't focused on her, his lips twitched upwards into a warm smile. It was nice having Hinata call him uncle instead of calling him a servant like she was trained to do so. "Have you ever been nervous before? Were you ever nervous on your first day at the Ninja Academy?" Hinata asked him, her cheeks burning red as she looked at her feet shyly. Hisashi chuckled as he remembered his first day of Ninja Academy. He was a bit nervous to start something new, but when he and Hiyashi first came here, his older brother was much more scared than him at the time. "I guess you can say that. But your father was much more terrified than me when we first started our ninja careers at the academy." Hinata's eyes widened into the size of pancakes. Papa was terrified? She couldn't believe it. Her father seemed so strong, stern, and lean. He rarely showed much emotion and Hinata always thought that the clan head wasn't afraid of anything. So imagine her surprise when her uncle told him that her father was scared of something. Before Hisashi could initiate into the story of the past, he saw the young heiress classroom approaching them fast. He smiled and looked down at her warmly. "I guess I will have to explain that story at another time, my dear." The brunette was confused at first, but that confusion quickly washed away once she saw the head of the branch house's hand reach out towards a sliding door. He pulled it open just as the bell sounded off. He went inside and pulled the shy Hyuga girl along with him. Iruka Amino was busy reading off the names that his new classroom held. He was a newly promoted teacher and it was his dream to help teach the future generation of ninja be ready for what the shinobi world held for them. Iruka was described as being both big-hearted and soft-hearted. The reason being that in his past he took on dangerous missions seeing as he was a chunin. But he hated working in the dangers of taking upscale missions, so he quit and became an instructor at the Konoha Ninja Academy instead. Even though he was kind, he could also be stern when the situation called for it. And the man was also a determined and strong-willed individual with a kind disposition. Iruka was a man of average height and build. He had brown hair that he kept in a ponytail, dark eyes, and a scar that ran across the bridge of his nose, which he had since his youth. He wore the standard Konoha shinobi outfit complete with a forehead protector, sandals, and a flak jacket. His sleeves are also rolled up about 1/4 of the way. He was just finished making all of his new students come up to the front and introduce themselves, and he was about to call the class into order and start the new lessons when he heard the classroom's door open. The chunin craned his neck to see an older male. He was a Hyuga judging from his white eyes, that had a semi-stern air about him. And he brought in a smaller Hyuga girl with him. He walked towards the now nervous Amino with the small girl trailing close behind him. "Are you the instructor of this classroom?" the taller male asked the brunette. Iruka gulped. If he knew one thing, it was that no one should ever cross a Hyuga, lest they find themselves in the hospital that same day. And the way the Hyuga talked to him, Iruka assumed that he had a high ranks in the Hyuga clan, even though the man had a forehead protector covering his forehead. It looked as though he was from the branch house. "Why yes." Iruka coughed to clear his throat of his shrill voice. "Ahem. I mean yes, Hyuga-san." Iruka replied to the man. He gave a tiny nod towards him. "I am Hisashi Hyuga, head of the Hyuga's branch household." He suddenly gestured towards the little girl next to him. "This is my niece Hinata Hyuga, heiress of the Hyuga clan and member of the main household." The little girl named Hinata scuffled her feet a little as she stared at them shyly. She was bandaged up quite a bit as glanced at the brunette before giving him a small wave. "A shy Hyuga? Now that's a new one." Iruka thought as she looked at the girl for a moment before looking back at Hisashi when the man addressed him once more. "As you can notice," Hisashi continued, "the head of the clan could not make it here because of important clan affairs. So I had to escort my niece personally." The leader of the lesser branch suddenly gave him a small bow, shocking Iruka immensely. "I am truly sorry we were not here on time." Feeling thoroughly embarrassed and confused, Iruka scratched the back of his head with one hand while the other waved off the Hyuga's strange and sudden politeness. No Hyuga-san, it's quite alright, I mean things happen you know? Hisashi nodded slowly before narrowing his eyes a bit, making Haruka cringe in fear. Do you mind if we converse outside, instructor? I have something I must tell you, for Lady Hinata's sake of course. Why yes of course, Haruka stammered. He watched Hisashi kneel down to the shy girl's level while he smiled at her warmly. Now Lady Hinata, you must stay here while I go speak with your new sensei. Is that understood? Hi, Uncle Hisashi. Hinata nodded. Hisashi smiled at his niece before patting her head in a fatherly manner. Oh, and I don't want you eavesdropping this time, okay? You've been doing that a lot recently and it's not very ladylike to do so, do I make myself clear? He said, giving her a knowing look. Hinata blushed and her face contorted into a look like she had just been caught stealing cookies from the cookie jar. Which, in a way was like that, sort of. Hinata blushed horribly and looked down at her feet in shame as she teetered her weight on one foot before switching to the other. Hi Uncle Hisashi. She mumbled and began playing with her fingers. He chuckled before standing up and dusting off his knees. Right, let's us go instructor. Yes Hisashi-sama. Haruka complied before following the man outdoors. Once Haruka was out of the classroom, Hisashi closed the sliding door with a respective click. Now then, the Hyuga matriarch of the branch said as he turned towards the brunette while he slipped his hands in his kimono's sleeves. You must be contemplating over why my niece has those bandages wrapped around her body. Yes, it has been bothering me ever since she entered the room. Haruka had watchful and piercing eyes. Nothing could elude him when he was really focused about something and put his mind to it. And the way he saw the tiny Hyuga hobble in the room with restricted steps, it bothered him to no end. And his worry doubled over once he saw the little girl's condition. Hisashi nodded slowly, pondering over whether or not he should trust this man with the past and dangerous events that happened a little over a month ago. When he saw the worry in the Umino's dark eyes, he knew that this man had a caring heart. Well then tell me, have you heard of what happened at the Hyuga compound not too long ago? The Chunin nodded his head. Yes, you Hyuga were attacked by the head ninja of Kumogakure, correct? He saw the man nod slowly and after a brief moment Haruka's eyes went wide. Why you mean Hinata was? The pale-eyed man nodded solemnly. Unfortunately it is so. Lady Hinata was caught in the incident but the thing is, she wasn't the one who was attacked, in a way. Haruka was confused. Huh? What do you mean by that Hyuga-san? Hisashi sighed before telling his tale. Lady Hinata was the one that did the attacking. She engaged the head of Kumo when she saw her mother, Hitomi Hyuga, at the mercy of that vermin of a ninja. He spat the word, vermin, out in anger as he recalled the story thoroughly from his dearest sister-in-law. Even though it could have cost him his life, Hisashi wanted to kill that man himself. But alas, his older brother had beaten him to it, thus making her acquire injuries from the battle. Did she kill the man? Haruka asked lowly. Even though he was glad that one of his newest students was safe and alive and well, he couldn't bear to think that a 6-year-old girl had gotten her first kill at such a young age. By heavens no, Hisashi said before rubbing his temples, she was unconscious, courtesy of the Kumogakure ninja, but he was killed by my brother Hiyashi Hyuga. What a relief. Haruka sighed in relief. The man was elated that the shy heiress hadn't committed her first kill and was even more so when she didn't see the man get killed right in front of her young eyes. Haruka was going to ask the leader of the lesser branch another question when the two shinobi heard loud grumblings and murmurings from inside the classroom. It seems your classroom is having an uproar, instructor. Hisashi said as he folded his arms with minor amusement etching his features. Aha, so it seems Hyuga-san. Haruka said sheepishly as he rubbed the back of his head. My name is Haruka Amino, Hyuga-san. Hisashi raised a brow. So it seems. Haruka felt his sweat drop as he hurriedly went towards the classroom door and slid it open. He was always nervous when he came into contact with some members of the Hyuga clan. They were always stern and didn't say much, but even more than that, they were intimidating. He shook his head and proceeded inside of the room in hopes of calming down his new class. As soon as her uncle left the classroom, Hinata was met with the curious and judgmental stares of her soon-to-be classmates. Hinata was standing in front of the classroom in a stiff posture with both of her hands clutching her bento box out in front of her. As she was being stared at, Hinata also did some of the staring at her new classmates as well. All of them seemed really eager, just like she was to start their first day of being introduced into the world of the shinobi. There were really pretty girls, rebellious boys, quiet people, loud people, and all of the above and more. As she was scanning the crowd with her huge lavender-tinted eyes, she caught a pair of black onyx eyes staring right back at her. The boy was fair-skinned who had piercing black onyx eyes, as stated previously, and black chin-length hair. His black hair was spiky in the back with bangs that hung above his eyes and reached a little over his jawline. He wore a simple long-sleeved black shirt with a raised collar and the Uchiha crest on the back, and white shorts with blue sandals. Hinata noticed that the boy had quite a large sum of girls hanging around him. They were swooning over him with tiny hearts shining in their eyes as they would sometimes breathe out his name like it was the most heavenly sound in the world. So his name is Sasuke. Hinata thought curiously as she tilted her head to the side and continued to look at the boy, but this time she looked at him with curiosity. That is until something clicked inside of her mind. Sasuke, as in Sasuke Uchiha. A while ago, when her mother was tucking her into bed at night, Hinata asked her if she had any friends. Hitomi said she had many friends, but she only had two that were her best friends in the whole wide world. Hinata didn't recall their names, but she did remember her mother mentioned that one of her friends had a son that was named Sasuke Uchiha. And Hinata was thoroughly confused by this revelation. It was a known fact that Hyugas and Uchihas despised each other very much, both claiming they were the better of all of the clans in the village hidden in the leaves. Her mother told her it was true, but there were some Uchihas in the Uchiha clan that were really nice like her friend. So is he nice, or is he a rival? Hinata narrowed her eyes a fraction of an inch as she observed the newly dubbed Sasuke Uchiha. So far, he didn't look like he was interesting or evil in her opinion, but she kept her eyes peeled. Even though Hinata has gained more confidence and the Hyuga clan has mellowed down a bit, she still wanted to uphold her clan's honor. So what's your name? Hinata jumped once she heard someone address her. She looked away from the Uchiha boy and peered into the crowd to see a lone boy raising his hand high in the air for some unknown reason. He had messy brown hair, sharp black eyes with vertical slit-like pupils, and pronounced canine teeth. He also had distinctive red fang markings on his cheeks. By seeing those markings, Hinata assumed he was from the Inuzuka clan that she had once read about in the Hyuga clan's library. He wore what looked to be a tan sweater, faded-out blue shorts, and the common blue ninja sandals. My name is Hinata Hyuga of the Hyuga clan. It is a pleasure to meet all of you. Hinata said, bowing humbly, reciting greeting lines that she was drilled to do when she went to go meet other nobles and their families. They murmured amongst themselves, thoroughly confused by her politeness. From what most of the children could decipher, mainly those from the ninja clans, the Hyuga were a prickly bunch that didn't really show compassion towards others, just like the Uchiha clan. Why are you wearing those bandages? Another one asked. This time it was a girl and she looked to more of a civilian that of a child from a ninja clan, from what Hinata could conclude. Hinata stiffened for a moment before answering the girl's question. From a fight. A really bad man tried to abduct me, so my mama fought him before she got severely injured by him. So before he could hurt my mama any further, I started to fight him myself until my papa came and dealt with him. Hinata answered truthfully. This caused the whole classroom to be filled with gasps. Then all of the children started to murmur amongst themselves, louder than before. They had never heard, much less seen, a child like them get hurt by an adult like she did. They don't know what most of the adults do to Naruto, of course. Were you really scared? Another girl asked. Hinata nodded. Yes, I was, but no one was there to help mama out but me. Not only had I had to fight the bad man to save my mama, but my little baby sister too. This caused a much bigger uproar of whispers as the children turned towards one another to talk amongst themselves. Before anyone else could ask the brunette more questions, Hinata suddenly turned and pointed a finger at the sole Uchiha boy in the classroom. You're in Uchiha, right? Hinata asked him. Sasuke was really surprised at the girl in front of him. He had overheard the conversation with the two men stating that this girl that was named Hinata Hyuga was the heiress to the Hyuga clan. He was even more surprised that she had said that her bandages were battle scars from when she fought, from what it sounded like, a full-fledged ninja that was 3 times her size. He didn't admit and didn't like it, but he found himself slightly impressed by her. And when she called him out on the spot, He very surprised to say the least. But he quashed that feeling and was annoyed when he thought the reason why she called him out was so she could proclaim his love to her. To him, girls were such fickle creatures. Yes, what's it to you, Hyuga? Sasuke spat out the name like it was disease-ridden. Hinata didn't miss the hostility in his voice and it made her blood rise slightly in anger. Her cheeks turned red and her hands were clenched into fists that were shaking in slight fury. Well then, I think your clan needs to learn how to have some fun because they're full of. The young heiress didn't believe she was going to say a bad word, but this boy, this Uchiha, just happened to look at her mighty clan with contempt with no regard for them whatsoever. They're full of meanies and stupid heads. What, you thought she was going to swear? Sheesh, Hinata isn't like that people. Kihihi. Sasuke widened his eyes. She didn't like the Uchiha clan and she thought they were stupid? For a 6-year-old, calling someone in the term of stupid head is the ultimate offense and it makes the offendee get mad really easy. Hey, you take that back right now, Hyuga. Sasuke growled as he glared daggers at her while he clenched his fists. Why don't you make me Uchiha? Hinata roared as she puffed out her cheeks in a cute but angry manner and glared right back at him. They had a standoff with their eyes as the class looked on in shock. Never, ever, had they expected to see an Uchiha of the Uchiha clan and a Hyuga of the Hyuga clan get really riled up at each other so quickly. It was history in the making and the class was in a loud uproar. Sasuke's fan club was getting mad at Hinata for insulting their beloved's clan but Hinata didn't care. The heir insulted the heiress clan and he was going to pay for it one way or another. All of your clan members are street stupid heads and your family is stupid. And you look stupid, you meanie. Hinata shouted and then she stuck out her tongue at him as much as she could. Sasuke felt his face heat up as this girl, this Hyuga, was insulting him with unrelenting blow after blow. And she dare have the galls to stick her tongue out at him? Now he was really angry. Sasuke jerked up from his seat and slammed his hands on the table. Why, you take that back right now or else, you idiot. Sasuke shouted at her, his pale cheeks heating up at being humiliated right in front of his new class. Hinata gasped and her whole face was engulfed in red. Idiot? How dare you? Sasuke smirked inwardly as he had finally found a weak spot in the young girl's defense. Yeah, you're an idiot. All of you Hyuga are idiots. Are not, Hinata protested. Are too, Sasuke shot back. Are not, are too. Hinata bristled before she pointed an accusing finger at the Uchiha heir. Well, you Uchiha are dummies that make horrible decisions for the leaf. And your police force street stinks like poopy diapers. Sasuke ground his teeth together as his angry blush now begun to spread across his nose. Do not, do too. Hinata screamed as she waved her arms up and down like a bird while her hands were enclosed into fists. Do not, do too. They both stopped suddenly so they could glare at their offender. The two royals were shaking in anger as they sized the other opponent up. Idiot! They both screamed simultaneously before looking away from each other with disgust. Hinata crossed her arms and faced the front door as she puffed out her cheeks cutely, while Sasuke sat back down in his seat and turned his head towards the window. They both had their eyes closed so they couldn't see the other and they both had small protruding veins that were pulsating on their foreheads. And as if on cue, the classroom door slid open revealing Iruka and Hizashi as the two men both walked in the classroom. They were surprised to see the classroom whispering loudly amongst themselves and were equally surprised to see Hinata Hyuga and Sasuke Uchiha looking like they were mad because they didn't get a toy they wanted. Iruka didn't know why but he felt as if he missed out on something huge. Which he did. What happened in here? He watched as the classroom turned in his direction before one half pointed at Hinata and the other pointed at Sasuke. Aha, this was going to be a long day for Iruka Amino. After class, the students of Iruka were dismissed to their first recess at the Konoha Ninja Academy. Hinata had been told by her uncle that her mother was going to pick her up after school, much to her delight. And he had also told her to try and make friends. They would prove to be a great asset when she became a genin. Right now, Hinata was standing at the academy's playground entryway holding a bouncy red ball in her hands. She had gotten the red ball by her new sensei, Iruka Amino. The shy Hyuga heiress thought that the Chunin was nice and considered him to be a great teacher. She was excited to learn things that she never had from her mother and father in the Hyuga clan. "Oh okay," Hinata said determinedly as she scanned the playground that her classmates were occupying. "Now to find someone that's willing to play with me." She looked around a bit more and saw a group of boys talking amongst themselves. She nodded again and made her way as fast as she could over to them. Hey, may I play with you?" Hinata asked, hope swelling inside of her. They boys turned and looked at her before having sneering looks on their faces. "Ew, no way. We don't want to play with a girl. You might give us cooties or something." They laughed and turned to walk away from the crestfallen Hyuga girl. Hinata looked at them angrily before sticking her tongue out them. "No matter. I will just find someone else to play with." "Why yeah," Hinata thought with newfound vigor filling up inside of her body. Hinata looked around again and this time saw 3 girls talking amongst themselves a few feet away from the Uchiha boy. No way was Hinata going to ask him to play. After what he said about her clan, she'd sooner behead Mr. Dai, not that she was going to in any way. Hinata ran up to them happily as they effectively cut their swooning and gossiping for a moment to stare at the heiress. Hello," Hinata greeted cheerfully. "Would you like to play with me?" The 3 Sasuke fangirls scowled at the brunette. "No way. After what you said to Sasuke, we'll never play with you." Suddenly one girl slapped the ball out of Hinata's hands and kicked it hard somewhere else. "Go find someone else and stay away from Sasuke." "Ah," Hinata screamed as she watched helplessly as her red ball flew off in a faraway direction. She rounded on the girls with her pale eyes blazing with childish fury. Well, you can keep your stupid head, Sasuke. I don't like him anyway." And with that, Hinata stomped off towards where he ball went, leaving the 3 Sasuke lovers, or harpies in this case, looking after her with shock and anger. Hinata scoured the play area high and low, looking for her missing ball. She was really depressed that none of the kids in her class wanted to play with her, and she was even more so seeing that she wouldn't make friends as easily as she thought she would. But nevertheless, she would try again to be as nice to her classmates as much as she could. Even if they were stupid heads and angered her a lot. Hinata looked around for a little while longer until she spotted a portion of the round object sticking behind the tree. "There it is," she exclaimed happily as she dashed over to her plaything as fast as she could. Once she made her way over, she spotted someone else holding it in their hands. It was a boy, and he was sitting on the swing looking up at her with immense shock. He had the most golden and brightest set of short blonde locks the shy Hyuga has ever seen. His eyes were as blue as the ocean and they seemed to pierce right into her very soul. His face held that childish roundness that all young children had, but it looked much more natural on him than another child. And his cheeks had 3 cute whiskers marks on each one, making him look like a cute baby fox. He wore a simple short-sleeved plain white shirt that had an orange swirl in the center of the front, and it went along with blue shorts and blue sandals. Even though it was a simple attire, Hinata thought he looked absolutely dashing in it. All in all, Hinata thought that the boy in front of her was adorable and cute. She blushed horribly and found herself quickly looking down at her feet and shifting them in the dirt as she felt a huge wave of embarrassment crash down upon her. The brunette was suddenly much more shy than usual, and she had no idea why. She twiddled her thumbs and glanced at him before refocusing with the ground. They both started simultaneously before clamping their traps up. Hinata's blush started to spread until it covered her ears and across the bridge of her nose. Her fidgeting increased as this time her knees started to buckle as if she was going to collapse any second now. Is this yours?" the boy asked her as he held out the bouncy red ball towards her. "Yes," Hinata squeaked as her head nodded vigorously. Hinata hesitantly reached out her small, pale hands towards the boy's tan, and slightly bigger ones. She placed her hands on the ball but not before his hands brushed against hers. Hinata gave out a small, eep, and quickly pulled her hands away from his along with the ball. Her heart pounded against her pale hands as her face burned from the contact. What was happening to her? Why was she blushing so much? Why did she feel like her heart was going to fly out of her chest? Who was this boy? All of these thoughts flew out of her head as quickly as they came once the brunette saw the boy's face. His head hung as his piercing cerulean eyes started to fade from the life they had shown moments before. His face morphed into a look of sadness. Hinata didn't understand at first, but she quickly figured that he was lonely and wanted someone to play with like she did. She gulped but carried out with her plan nonetheless. "Excuse me?" The boy looked up at her. "Would you like to play with me?" 6-year-old Naruto Uzumaki was having a crummy day. His morning started off as the usual. His latest prank was big and flashy as it had always been, and he'd been chased by the Anbu, only for him to slip away unscathed. He was really happy that the Konoha Ninja Academy was starting its first day today, and he couldn't wait to show off how strong he was to everybody else so they would stop scorning and disowning him. And he felt since he was starting to become a ninja, he would be one step closer to achieving his dream. To become a Hokage of the village hidden in the leaves. But that wasn't the bad part. When Naruto first exited his apartment that he obtained not too long ago when he was thrown out of the orphanage, he began walking down the main streets of Konoha. The villagers all whispered as he passed. He was used to that, but the whispers today were especially hurtful. They would say, "The demon brat is going to the academy." And, "He shouldn't become a ninja because of the little demon he is." Or, "What's the Hokage thinking, sending such a thing towards children? For all we could know, he might kill them all." And the whispers continued. Naruto just didn't understand why they hated him so much. What did he ever do to them? And why did they call him a demon? As far as he knew, he wasn't one and didn't look like one. So why did the villagers constantly scorn him for something he had no clue about? He didn't know and he didn't want to care, but his mind couldn't help but circulate around these questions that he didn't have an answer to. And once the blonde lad had entered the academy, he was met with something that stung him even more, that the villagers' hurt words. The families that were sending off their kids into building. His heart ached painfully at the sight. He desperately wanted to have a family. He desperately wanted to be loved as he had heard, and he desperately wanted to have friends like all of the other kids had. But everyone denied him that because he was labeled different. Naruto walked past the families and heard their hateful words that were filled with smite. It made him sulk even lower and his heart ached more so. But another upside was that his new teacher, that was named Iruka Amino, was really nice to him. But the blonde boy couldn't help but notice that the man was always nervous around him. Like Naruto had a horrible illness of something. So he's like them, isn't he? Naruto thought as his eyes drooped even further. It was yet another question he didn't have an answer to. When it was recess, Naruto was more than happy that he was out of that classroom. Mainly because he hated lectures and was never good with written stuff. He failed the academy 3 times already, and this would be his 4th time participating at the building again. He was confident that he would pass this time even though others would say he wouldn't. He didn't care what they said because nothing would deter him from his dream of becoming Hokage. Anyway, Naruto started to ask around his classmates if they wanted to play with him. The Uzumaki had heard and seen of this playing, but he's never actually tried it before. And when he did ask around, of course all of the kids denied his request. They would always say that their parents told them to stay away from him like he was the plague, and of course being the children they were, they heeded their parents' words and complied with their wishes like they didn't have a brain for themselves. Bunch of idiots. So Naruto sulked and went over to his favorite spot, which was a lone swing connected to a lone tree that faced the Konoha Ninja Academy and its students. He sat down and began pushing back and forth on it with very little force. What did I do to deserve this? Naruto thought sadly as tears threatened to make itself known in the blonde's beautiful blue eyes. Why do they hate me so much? He was about to cry silent tears when he felt something probe against his leg. Huh? He looked down and saw a red ball resting against his leg. He picked it up and curiously looked at it. He gave it a dribble and the ball bouncy high in the air before Naruto neatly caught in his tan hands. It's a bouncy ball. His lips twitched upwards a little before it stretched into a full-blown grin. Cool. His grin suddenly washed away when he heard heavy footsteps make his way over to him. Once they were here, Naruto looked up to see a girl staring right back at him. She had dark blue hair that was cut Princess Hemi cut style and had 2 long strands that reached a little over her jawline. She had bandages wrapped around her arms and some on half of her fingers, and had bandages that were plastered on her face. She was panting a little as she looked at him, and Naruto looked at her curiously. Naruto was confused when he saw the girl's cheeks turn red before she looked down at the ground and began to fidget in front of him. His head tilted to the side as his face took on his infamous closed eyes expression. They both started out before shutting up their mouths again. The blonde hadn't expected that they both speak out at the same time. He was usually the one that started the yell, talking first. Naruto squinted his closed eyes some more at her, if that was possible, as he tried to remember the shy girl in front of him. His brain's gears started to slowly spin as he suddenly perked up in realization. Took him long enough. Hey, she's that girl that stood up to that Sasuke bastard. Naruto thought as he grinned his foxy grin at her. Finally, a girl that isn't obsessed with that jerk. He stopped grinning when he saw the brunette give nervous glances at the ball in his hand. It must be hers. Naruto began again as he held out the ball towards her. Is this yours? Yes. The girl squeaked out and she reached out for the ball in Naruto's hands. He didn't notice that his hands brushed against hers. He was too much of a dunce to realize it. Sorry people, but I know that you know it's true. But he was distraught when she yanked the ball away from him like he was going to steal it from her or something. Naruto looked crestfallen that the only person that had actually come up to him and talked to him without insulting him, also treated him like he was garbage. His sulking didn't last long as it usually would on this day. Excuse me? Naruto looked up at her with sad but slightly confused eyes. Would you like to play with me? She asked him. It was then Naruto felt as if time had stopped. His head had whipped up so fast, he almost had a whiplash and his neck made several popping noises. His blue eyes widened with shock and immense surprise as the girl stared right back at him with a red face, but a friendly smile. All his life Naruto has always wanted to be around someone. And this girl was offering just that on a silver platter. His heart drummed loudly in his ears and his spirits soared, and yet, he couldn't help but feel a little skeptical of her and her offer. Naruto had that infamous closed-eyed expression again with his bottom lip poking out as if he was thinking really hard about something. After a long bout of silence, the blonde Uzumaki spoke once again. Are you sure you want to play with me? Don't you have someone else to play with you? Naruto asked as he scratched his head in confusion despite feeling a twinge of regret in his words. He expected to see her change her mind and walk away from him, but yet again, the weird girl, in his book, shook her head and gave him another friendly smile. No, she replied honestly, I tried to ask some of other kids if they could play with me, but they all said no because I was a girl or I was weird. Her smile faltered a bit as she stared at the ground sadly. Naruto opened his eyes and stared at the girl with heartfelt pity as he watched her look at the ground with a remorse expression that he knew all too well. After all, he had displayed expression for as long as he could remember. So in a way, she's just like me, Naruto thought. He was sad that no one would play with her, but he was also happy that he finally had someone who shared his feelings and knew what his pain was like, to some degree of course. But Naruto blinked as he looked back at her only to see the girl have a somewhat annoyed expression on her face as she looked off into a different direction. Naruto raised a brow in confusion before leaning forward a little past the tree that was blocking his view to see that Sasuke was being surrounded by girls at his beck and call. I certainly didn't ask him to play with me, the little girl hissed, making Naruto flinch a little in fear. That stupid poopy head is a meanie and I hate meanies. She screamed loud enough for the Uchiha boy to hear, which he did. Sasuke looked back over his shoulder to see that bratty Hyuga and that loser Naruto, in his eyes anyway, staring right back at him. The Hyuga suddenly stuck out her tongue out at him and pulled down a lower eyelid on one of her eyes and she began waggling her tongue teasingly at the Uchiha heir. That Hyuga, he growled as he began shaking in anger. The two royals glared at each other for a few moments before they quickly turned away from each other with annoyed expressions on their faces. Naruto looked back and forth at the two before bursting out into a fit of laughter. Never in his young life has he seen Sasuke Uchiha, get so riled up by a girl. This was from the guy that declared the raven-haired boy was his rival and fought him numerous of times before they entered the academy this day. He laughed so hard that he fell out of the swing with tears splaying across his face. He also heard the girl giving her own bout of giggles, but he was too preoccupied by his own laughter. After they both calmed down a bit, Naruto took back his position of sitting on the swing, but this time he had a huge grin that was slapped across his face. Oh man, that was golden. You're pretty awesome for a girl. Naruto complimented in his own weird but cute way. The girl blushed horribly and her feet began to play with one another. Thank you. Naruto blinked a few times before his brain finally clicked. Oh right, my name. Naruto cleared his throat and jabbed a thumb at his chest as he puffed it out with a lopsided grin stretching upon his lips. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. And I'm going to be Hokage one day, believe it. He saw the girl giggle with one of her small and pale hands covering her lips. He was slightly annoyed that she was laughing at him, but he stopped when she had gotten a rein over her giggles before she addressed him again. My name is Hinata Hyuga and I'm going to lead my Sea clan with peace among the two houses when I become clan head. She suddenly smiled at him with a cute blush on her cheeks as she tilted her head slightly to the side. And I do believe it that you'll become Hokage one day. Naruto. Naruto blinked in surprise as he stared at the newly dubbed Hinata in surprise. He had never had one person in the village to believe him in his dreams, but he had just met he and already she believed him. He looked at her dubiously, detecting if she was lying or not, but he found no lies or disgust in her smile. It was genuine, it was pure, it was true. Naruto felt warm, really warm, as if there was a gentle fire that was licking at his insides and it made him feel great all over. He liked it, he really liked it. For the first time in his life, Naruto felt an unfamiliar warmth spread across his cheeks. He didn't know why, but he felt very embarrassed right now. So to hide his embarrassment, he rubbed the back of his head sheepishly and began to laugh for no apparent reason. But he felt like laughing. He felt like smiling. And he felt like he was being cared for. He suddenly felt a tug on his hand and looked to see Hinata pulled on it. Come on, she said as she struggled to get him off of the swing. I'll let us go play Naruto. Our recess doesn't last forever. Naruto blinked a few times before snapping out of it and grinning at his new playmate. Yeah sure Hinata, come on let's go. He quickly stood and began pulling her along as they ran away from the lonely setting that was the tree and the swing. And on that same day that swing was never sat on again. After recess the class had lunch. Naruto had a really run day that day, and his smile was even brighter than it usually was. Much to the annoyance of most and the joy of a few. Hinata had showed him many games that he's seen and some that he's never heard of. Most of the games he hadn't heard of were made up by Hinata herself, but they were still fun to play in his eyes. One game was called Kick the Can, which was like a game to see he could kick an empty can the farthest. However kicked it the farthest without that person's can getting caught, was the winner. But since they didn't have a can they had to use the bouncy red ball, and of course being the determined one he was, Naruto won most of the rounds. Another game was called Ninja. It was a game where two or more players chose a hidden village and they went against each other to try and bring the other village down. In this game, Hinata won majority of the rounds because of her training and flexibility as a Hyuga and her odd, but effective climbing skills. Naruto was mad but he wasn't angry too long. One of the games that Hinata made up was called Eris Orders. In this game Hinata was the leader and all of the players had to do her bidding. Naruto, since he was one of the two players, had to do whatever she said and wasn't angry or annoyed with it at all. It was actually pretty fun for him. The reason being because the duo mostly got to tease Sasuke. For instance, on one order, Hinata decreed that she ride on Naruto's back and that she bring him to Sasuke. He complied and once they got over, she ordered him to stick his tongue out at the Uchiha with her. They both did and gave him the stink eye at the same time. This caused Sasuke to shout at them as the two masters of crime ran away while they both laughed hysterically. Thus, making Naruto have one of the best days in his young life. Right now the Uzumaki was waiting at the playground entryway doors for the Hyuga girl to finish getting her bento box out from the classroom and come back outside so they could decide at which picnic table they should sit at. He didn't have a lunch with him because he forgot to buy one at the ramen stand. Since Naruto was considered a bane to majority of the villagers' existence, he was been banned from almost every store in the village hidden in the leaves. The only food place that he is allowed to eat at is the Ichiraku ramen stand, well that and maybe Yakunichi Q's barbecue. Oi, Naruto. Naruto craned his neck to see Kiba Inuzuka of the Inuzuka clan come running over to the blonde boy. The reason why the Uzumaki knew the brunette was because sometimes they did pranks together when Naruto was planning to prank the Inuzuka clan. They would both get in a whole heap of trouble but it was still fun seeing the distressed looks of the tracking and hunter clan. Naruto really didn't know if he and Kiba were friends. I mean, sure, they did do a lot of pranks together, but they also wanted the same goal of becoming Hokage. Kiba had told him himself when Naruto boasted out that he wanted to be Hokage when he grew up. So Kiba was his rival but also a pranking buddy. Naruto considered him to be a person he talked to a lot, but not a friend. "What are you doing here, Kiba?" Naruto asked as he put his arms behind his head and linked his fingers together as he stared at the Inuzuka boy with his closed eyes. "I should be asking you the same thing, idiot," Kiba groused as he stood in front of the hot-blooded blonde with his hands shoved in his pockets. "What you doing over here by the door? Got in trouble by the sensei?" He sneered as he smirked at Naruto with a feral look in his eyes. If there was one thing Kiba was right about, it was that Naruto was hot-blooded. After all, he was an Uzumaki. "Hey, you take that back right now, dog breath." Even though the Inuzuka wasn't as hot-blooded as the hyperactive whiskered boy, he was close enough to it though. Kiba grabbed the hem of his collar and yanked at it so the blonde could get closer into the brunette's face. "What did you say, you idiot?" he yelled as a vein burst on his forehead. "You heard me, dog breath. You wanna get your clock cleaned out by me?" Naruto growled as he too grabbed onto Kiba's collar and pulled a fist back at the ready. "Ha, as if you could beat me, you no clan." Those words hit home and it stung Naruto's heart multiple times like he was getting repeatedly stung by a yellow jacket. The blonde ground his teeth together and raised his angry fist up higher as his grip on the Inuzuka clan heir's collar tightened. "What did you say? You wanna go?" Naruto screamed into the boy's face. "Yeah, let's. I've been meaning to." Kiba was cut off when he felt a tapping on his side. Naruto stopped his fuming once he felt a tapping on his side as well. The two distraught and angry males turned their heads to the side to see little Hinata looking back up at them with her huge pale eyes. She had a bento box in her hands as she stared at them with a blank expression. "Hinata?" Naruto said, looking thoroughly confused at her impassive facial expression. "New girl?" Kiba said, equally confused. She didn't say anything but just clamped her mouth over the carefully made knot that the dark purple cloth that shielded her bento box provided. The heiress suddenly made a monkey pose and then a chicken pose. "What the?" the two rivals said as they watched their new classmate perform outrageous and random poses in front of their eyes. As they watched, Hinata made a crab pose with her hands clipping them together like pinchers. All of a sudden, without warning, Hinata's pinchers lunged out and took a hold of one of Naruto's and Kiba's cheeks. She pinched them hard and gave them a hard tug. The two boys yelped out in pain and nursed their cheeks once Hinata finished delivering their punishments. She opened her mouth and let the bento box fall into her hands. "Hinata's style, pinching crab of punishment," she said lowly as she watched the two boys writhe around in pain as they continued to nurse their slightly red cheeks. "Hey, what the hell, new girl?" Kiba screamed as he pointed an accusing finger at her. "Why the hell did you do that? Why, you G guys were about to fight, so I had to stop you." Hinata got into her crab pose again, but this time she started to shift around like a crab while one of her pinchers held her bento box. "That's my new jutsu." She suddenly looked at Kiba and Naruto with a glooming and scary look that sent chills up their spine. "You want me to do it again?" No. They both gulped nervously as they back away a few steps from the Hyuga heiress. She stared at them with her gloomy look for a few more moments before her facial expression turned bright, cheery, and shy a second later. "Gee, good. Now see, come on, Naruto, we have to go eat." "You're welcome to join us if why you want, Kiba," she said while she tugged Naruto along towards a picnic table. Sure," the dog lover said as he started to follow the duo towards an empty picnic table that wasn't that far away. After settling down a bit and waiting for Kiba to get his bento box and coming over to join the duo, the three soon-to-be companions began to eat their lunches, with Hinata giving Naruto's half of hers. Since Hinata was from a wealthy family and a prestigious clan, Hinata always had large lunches that she never finished and had to save for leftovers. But since Naruto didn't have any, Hinata was more than willing to give him half of hers. Naruto was elated and yet astounded at the big meal he was getting. One look at the bento box as it was set down upon the table and it made the blonde's eyeballs almost pop out of his sockets. It was huge. It was probably the most biggest lunch he has ever received in his life. His mouth drooled as the delectable substance that was gifting his eyes of looking at. Hinata's bento box came with a top that she scooped out his half into with chopsticks. It had mounds of rice, sausages that were shaped into flowers, a few sushi that were falling like small wheels on his rice, and an egg roll that was longer than his middle finger. All in all, it was a heavenly sight for our beloved whiskered boy. It seemed as Kiba agreed with him as the Inuzuka was also drooling with his tongue hanging out at the sight of the flower-shaped meat. Naruto gulped as he tried to get a rein over his hunger. It didn't help as his stomach began to grumble loudly at the sight of this banquet of a meal. "Are you sure I can have this much food?" Naruto asked Hinata as he looked up at her for a moment before looking back at the food. Of course. Hinata blushed as she giggled at the hungry expression on Naruto's face. "I can never eat as much as my family provides me, so it'll be nice that this food will be eaten fresh instead of being a leftover meal." She glanced at the salivating brunette as he had not taken his sharp eyes off of her sausages once. Hinata giggled again and began giving all over the flowered-shaped sausages over to the boy's own bento box. "Here Kiba, you can have my sausages. I'm not a big fan of meat anyway." Really? I can?" Kiba stammered as he looked up at her with wide eyes. Hinata smiled and nodded and clasped her hands together in silent prayer before getting her chopsticks and began eating. The boys just looked at the food before looking at each and then looking over to Hinata. Sensing their eyes on her, Hinata looked up to see their confused yet surprised expressions again. Well, go on." Hinata prodded the two with a wave of her chopsticks. "Eat up. You don't want the food to spoil, do you?" They both shook their heads and stared at the food in very hungry manner. "Itadakimasu." They both practically screamed to the top of their lungs and began scarfing down their food at a breakneck speed. "Oh man, this food is just too good," Naruto thought happily as he shoveled more food so his cheeks could be filled up. He gulped everything that was in his mouth down in one fell swoop. And again the whiskered boy continued to shovel in food in his eating hole. "Hinata has this good stuff and doesn't even eat all of it? Who could resist a great meal like this?" Unbeknownst to him, Hinata was watching him with amused and bashful eyes. She didn't know why, but being close to the blonde made her feel much more happier than she has ever been in her entire life. And when he would occasionally glance at her and give her a goofy grin before stuffing his face again, Hinata felt as if she was on cloud nine. He seemed like he would make a good friend. Hinata pondered that lone word in her head. Were they friends? They had just met today, but it seemed like they were good friends since birth. She would have to ask him later on when she had the chance. Even though he was stuffing his face, Naruto did wonder why the shy Hyuga heiress was being so nice to him when they just met. "It's weird," he thought as he slowed his chewing to glance at her. "It's like she treats me like a friend or something." He stopped chewing altogether when his eyes widened in surprise as he replayed that thought in his head over and over. "Are we even friends?" Naruto contemplated over that single thought for a brief moment before the yummy-smelling aroma of his lunch wafted around his nostrils. The blonde lad ignored his previous thought as he continued to stuff his face. "Oh well, I'll just ask about it later." Hinata was waiting for her mother with Naruto right by her side. Kiba had gone home before them and she had asked Naruto if he would be willing to stay with her and meet her mother. He was hesitant at first, but he agreed not long after that. They were both standing at the front of Konoha Ninja Academy's entryway and Hinata was fidgeting a little while Naruto held his hands behind his head while he tapped his foot impatiently against the ground. The brunette kept sneaking glances at the blonde while her cheeks turned a pretty shade of red. Why am I like this when I'm around Naruto? She thought as she took another glance before focusing on her wiggling fingers that were intertwining and unraveling now and then. He's just a regular boy. The heiress fidgeted some more before looking back up at him. And what happened next really took her breath away. Then setting sun seemed to sit atop of the blonde's locks, making them flare out in an exotic stream golden of light. A gentle breeze bellowed his hair, creating a cascading array of sun-kissed beams of light as the Uzumaki's hair shifted gloriously in the wind. It was wild, it was free, and it was beautiful. Then the young girl looked at his eyes that focused towards the streets. His eyes that weren't closed in his infamous fashion, but eyes that showed much depth as if they had seen all of the world and what it had to offer. Eyes that were as deep as the ocean but held an exuberant yet gentle existence in them. Eyes that were strong, and eyes that were true. The kind girl blushed as she found herself being lost in the lonely boy's eyes. It was as if she was drowning in a sea of blue, but as she was drowning, the cerulean sea hugged and caressed her skin as if she was made of glass. Her lavender-tinted eyes searched his blue ones of anything false, anything faulty, but found none in the least. Those eyes held pureness and they held the truth. Naruto blinked as he felt the hairs of his neck stand up straight and tall. He looked down at Hinata. He was taller than her by a few inches after all and saw her staring straight at him, without being sheepish at the fact that she was staring at him for an awfully long time. And once he saw her face, his eyes immediately caught hers. Her eyes, they were pupilless, yes, but they held much more beauty than any other eyes he had ever seen. Well, as far as he knew anyway. But those pale eyes that all in her family had, her eyes were different. They held color, they held light. They were the beautiful color of the flower that rose high and proud in the spring. But her eyes did not held arrogance as her family did. No, they held kindness, compassion, care, gentleness, and most of all, they held love. Love for which not the blonde lad understood. Love for which not he did not know how to feel. But he felt warm. Yes, a warmth that exploded throughout his entire being, and it made his toes curl at the feeling. Literally, the young male soul found himself getting lost, for the first time, in someone else's eyes. Those eyes that were like a meadow of beautiful and rare flowers that had suddenly made itself known in the world without warning. They were gratifying. They were humbling. Those eyes were the definition of beautiful. The girl could not speak, just as the boy could not either. The girl's face turned red as she looked away from the boy and bit on a finger in embarrassment. The boy felt an overwhelming wave of disappointment as he could no longer look into the girl's eyes. The girl felt the same but was too ashamed of saying so. The girl tried to turn her back on the boy, but he wouldn't let her. The blonde grabbed the brunette's hand before she could complete her embarrassed act. She was shocked at his actions, but looked into those eyes once again with a pink face. He stared right back into those lovely eyes. He got lost in them, only to lose his words that he wanted to speak. He felt that warmth again. That warmth that spread all inside of his innards, that warmth that filled him with glee. That warmth that made him feel things that the boy didn't understand. It returned, but it only warmed his cheeks. His cheeks that began to burn hotter and hotter until his ears burned as well. The girl looked at the boy as he looked right back. She saw his face, but was surprised to see a hue of pink stain his tanned cheeks and ears. The kind girl thought that her counterpart always seemed like the type that would never blush. But here he was, right here in front of her, displaying a small blush of his very own right in front of her young eyes. And she realized she must have had some sort of hand in it. She watched as he was about to say something when another voice beat him to it. "Hello there, Hinata. Are you ready to go home, my flower?" The two children jumped as their hearts quickened their pace and their blushes turned dark red. Hinata felt Naruto quickly let go of her hand as he stuffed it inside of his pockets in a flash. She felt an immense twinge of disappointment and for once in her life, wished her mother wasn't here right now. Hello mama and yes I am but. The heiress gestured shyly to the boy next to her who was sweating bullets as he smiled a cheesy smile. This is a C classmate of mine and his name is Naruto Uzumaki. He played W with me at recess tea today. Hitomi smiled at Hinata's soon-to-be friend but then gasped once she recognized his face and who he was. Naruto? Little Naruto? Hitomi yelled excitedly as she quickly kneeled down in front of the now confused children with a slap-happy smile on her face. It's been so long. Do you remember me? Naruto shook his head. He did expect her to know who he was, but he didn't expect her to be so happy about his identity. No I don't. Who the heck are ya? The little boy asked rudely as he looked at her quizzically with his eyes squinted in his infamous eye expression. Hitomi laughed heartily at the boy's crude behavior. Yep, the boy definitely had his mother's antics. Ha ha ha, you remind me so much of your mother, Naruto. It's uncanny but it's flattering at the same time. Hinata looked at her mother with mild confusion while Naruto looked at the woman as if she had suddenly sprouted a second head. Why you knew my mom? Naruto shouted with disbelief and a glimmer of hope shining in his young blue eyes. Of course I did, she was a really good friend of mine. We used to be on the same genin team when we're 12 years old. The gentle Hyuga matriarch sighed as she recalled good memories of her past. Hinata's eyes widened in realization. So the other best friend her mother mentioned was Naruto's mother. It was a real surprise seeing as new feelings were beginning to arise in her body, and it made her happy to know that her mother and her soon-to-be-realized crush's mom were great friends. Can you tell me about her? What was she like? Was she pretty? Did she like ramen? Did she like pranks? Was she a really strong ninja? Naruto suddenly stopped for a second before continuing his onslaught of questions. Oh, what was my dad like? Was he strong? Was he cool? Ma, Naruto, Hitomi giggled as she held up her hands for quiet and to ease the boy down a bit. I'll tell you everything, I promise. But in order to do that, you need to come with us for dinner, how's that sound? Naruto gasped in shock. No one has ever invited him over to their homes before. They would always scorn him or spit at him, telling him that a demon of his kind aren't allowed to come into other people's home. To be allowed to live in a home, in fact. So when Hinata's mom offered him into their home, he was truly shocked. He looked at Hinata, who was just smiling and nodding for him to take the offer. So he did. Hinata was elated that she would be spending more time with Naruto. She didn't know why, but it made her very happy to be in his presence. She felt very safe when she was near him, and it made her feel all warm and tingling inside, and she liked it. As they trekked towards the Hyuga establishment, with the sun sinking low behind them, Hinata suddenly realized something. Something very important. Mama, what about big brother Neji? Wasn't he supposed to be with us at pickup time? Ah yes, you didn't know? Neji got off early from the academy an hour earlier before you two did. Hitomi replied as she took the two children by the hands and pulled them along. He told us that when he made his way back home by himself. I was very surprised by that, and your uncle nearly had a heart attack when Neji informed us that he walked in the streets alone without any adult supervision to aid him. Both Hitomi and Hinata giggled. Seeing the usually level-headed and collective Hisashi Hyuga nearly go berserk was indeed a rare sight to see. Naruto began as he interrupted the two females' merriment. Who's this Neji and Hisashi? He asked. Hitomi just smiled. Don't worry little Naruto, you'll see them soon enough. Although, I will tell you a little bit about them along the way. And then the Hyuga matriarch began describing who they were and other members of the Hyuga clan. It was early evening and the sun sank further into the horizon, creating beautiful hues of orange, crimson, and purple. Many of the villagers were turning in as it was getting late, leaving alone a few to roam the streets of Konohagakure. Among them were three figures that consisted of Naruto Uzumaki, Hinata Hyuga, and Hitomi Hyuga, as they were getting ever closer to the prestigious compound that was the Hyuga clan. Naruto and Hinata were chatting animatedly as Hitomi listened in with a happy smile on her face, and added her own input when she was asked something by the two children. Naruto had recently discovered that Hisashi Hyuga was Hinata's uncle and Neji Hyuga was Hinata's cousin, but she sometimes called him her big brother. Hitomi explained once you got pasted their semi-rough exterior, they were really nice people. The blonde felt reassured because the way she had described them, they seemed like really strict guys that really unsettled him. But when she explained about Hinata's father, he was even more unsettled when the man didn't show nearly as much emotion as his brother and nephew did. But Hinata had reassured him that her father was really nice, which helped the boy, but he was still unnerved by the powerful clan head. As they talked, Naruto found out that he and Hinata had a lot of things in common. She liked to talk about her dream as clan head like he was with his dream of becoming Hokage. She ate a lot like Naruto did with ramen when it came to cinnamon rolls. And she liked to go on adventures, though it was with her stuffed bear, Mr. Dai, and she liked to train a lot just like he did. But what really made the blonde Uzumaki really like Hinata was the fact that she was constantly looked down upon by the Hyuga clan's elders, just like he was with the village. Sure, she didn't go through what he had to go through every day, but she had felt the same pain like he did. Hinata and her mother explained how the Hyuga elders deemed Hinata weak, even though she was improving with her gentle fist style. They never gave the blue net the time of day to show them her training, and constantly bugged Hiyashi that she be branded with the caged bird seal and thrown into the branch house. They told the young girl that her gentle nature reflected badly to the clan and only slowed down her progress as she trained in the Hyuga arts. Every day they would berate her and call her mean names like weakling, or disgusting, or other names like that, and it made little Hinata cry every time they did that. It made Naruto extremely mad that the first person in his life, besides the old man Hokage, was being picked on, and it was by her own family no less. It made his blood boil and his lips curl as he gave a low growl in the back of his throat. To hell with that, Naruto screamed as he stopped walking and looked down at his feet with his piercing blue eyes narrowing. Nobody's gonna pick on my new friend with that kinda crap. If they're gonna pick on her, then I'll beat up every last one of them, till they say sorry to Hinata. Hinata stared at the blonde boy in shock while Hitomi's eyes widened before she smiled at him. The Hyuga heiress tried to wrap her mind around what Naruto said. They were friends? He didn't think she was weird like the others? He didn't think she was weak like she was told by the elders? Naruto didn't notice her shocked expression, but he walked up to her and gripped her shoulders. This action made her blush, but the blonde was naturally oblivious to it. Hinata, you were the first person ever to be my friend, and I ain't gonna let those mean old farts hurt you. If they try to, they're gonna have to get through me first, believe it. Naruto then gave her a confident grin as he let her go and patted his bicep. I am the first person to be Naruto's friend, Hinata thought as she stared at the boy with immense shock. She had never known that Naruto didn't have any friends. To her, he seemed like the person to make friends easily. But as she thought about it, she remembered seeing parents herd their kids away from him as both the children and the parents glare at him. But the parents' glares were much more hate-filled. Hinata ignored the problem for now and paid her attention back to Naruto. Her cheeks turned deep red as she started to shuffle her feet shyly on the ground. I trust you Naruto, and thank you for letting me be your friend. Naruto's grin widened as he placed his hands behind his head. No problem Hinata, I like people like you anyway. He began to walk again as he had a huge amount of happy peps in his steps. Now let's get going, I'm starving. While Naruto was walking, Hinata was frozen in her spot as her huge lavender-tinted eyes grew wide. She began to replay that particular sentence in her brain over and over again. I like people like you anyway. I like people like you. People like you. Like you. I like you. At that last thought, Hinata's face exploded into a dangerous shade of crimson as steam started to bellow out of her ears. She began to feel woozy as her vision started to slip her, with black spots clouding her eyes. She only had one thought before she slipped into a state of unconsciousness. Naruto likes me? And for the first time in her life, Hinata fainted. Luckily for her, her mother caught her before the young girl could hit the ground. Hitomi heaved the girl up and held her with Hinata's head resting on her shoulder. The matriarch had watched the whole scene and she was extremely happy. Oh my little flower has her very first crush. Hitomi swooned as she started to catch up to little Naruto. She was brought out of her happiness when she suddenly thought of something. I wonder what Hiyashi will think of this. After talking and walking for a few more minutes, the entourage of three finally arrived at the Hyuga clan's compound. And to say it was big was an understatement. They were standing outside of the compound with its defensive feudal lord-style fence looming over the three with its greatness showering down on them. But even from there, Naruto could still see the large feudal lord-styled mansion that loomed even taller than the fence, and he could also see the roofs of some other houses that were inside of the fence. Welcome to the Hyuga clan's compound, little Naruto. Hitomi beamed at him as she began to pull him and Hinata along to the front gates. This is the Hyuga clan? Naruto nearly screamed as his cerulean eyes almost popped out of their sockets. It's huge. It's like it's its own country or something, believe it. Hinata giggled at Naruto's reaction. She had lived here all her life and she still couldn't get over the fact that she lived in such a wonderful place that was the Hyuga compound. It didn't help that every day she woke up being called the heiress of the Hyuga clan, or Lady Hinata, for that matter. Why yes, it does seem that way at first Naruto, but when you live in a really big place like this, why you get used to it after a while. Hinata explained with a smile on her face. They made their way up to the front gates, only to be met by two guards who stood rigid as a rock as they scanned the area with their Byakugan active. When they took notice of Hinata and Hitomi, they both deactivated their dojutsu and bowed towards the two females respectively. Lady Hitomi, Lady Hinata, welcome back, one guard said as he rose up from his bow. Lord Hiyashi is waiting for you inside. The two blinked when they took notice of Naruto. The blonde boy looked down at the ground when he noticed them staring. The Hyuga clan didn't have a particular grudge against the boy, they were just a little wary of him and his tenant. Before they could question him, Hinata had taken the liberty of speaking up for the blonde. This is my friend Naruto Uzumaki. He's going to be coming inside with Yuas for a bit, so I hope you don't mind. She had seen the looks they were giving him. They looked to be confused and very unnerved by the presence of Naruto, for which she didn't understand. She had seen some of the villagers pull of those same unnerved looks before they turned into a scowl when they directed their attention at Naruto. Hinata was slightly angry that they disrespected Naruto for something she thought he didn't know, but it made her curious as to why they gave the whiskered child the stink eye whenever he went past them. One way or another, she would get to the bottom of this and prove Naruto's innocence. Hitomi smiled warmly at her daughter. She couldn't believe that her little flower was growing up so fast. First she had made her very first friend, and now her first friend turned out to be her crush. On the same day, no less. It made Hitomi swoon at the thought. I wonder if this crush of hers will turn out to be true love. Hitomi thought as she sighed wistfully at the thought. If it does and they both realize that they do love each other, then maybe they will both have children together and they will be my grandchildren. At that thought, a big blush had spread across Hitomi's cheeks as she smiled giddily. Maybe she was getting a bit ahead of herself, but you never know, it could happen. Kihihi. Lady Hitomi, a guard said as he stared at the matriarch in shock. 1 minute she was fine and the next minute, the two guards were watching as their lord's wife started to giggle uncontrollably for no apparent reason. Hitomi giggled some more as she held her cheek in a hand. She waved them off when they asked if she was ill. No, nothing of the sort. I assure I am just fine. I am just a little happy is all. Hitomi suddenly placed a hand on both Naruto's and Hinata's backs. Little Naruto here is our guest of honor this night, for he shall be accompanying us for dinner. The two guards blinked in realization and bowed respectively towards Naruto. We are very sorry, Mr. Uzumaki, we did not know our place. Have mercy on us. Naruto felt very uncomfortable right now. He never had anyone ever bow to him before. He was always scorned and never showed the respect of being a villager of Konoha. Heck, he wasn't even shown the respect of being a human being by anyone. So when he saw the two Hyuga bowing before him, for some reason he felt like hiding behind something. Naruto scratched his spiky blonde hair with a hand while the other waved them off in a frantic motion. Don't worry about it, you guys. It's no problem at all, he said while smiling at them nervously. The two guards were shocked at his politeness but nodded as they went to open the gates. The doors heaved open with loud and deep creaking filling their ears as they watched the two great gates open up for them. Once it was done, Naruto's young blue eyes went wide yet again. It was big? He saw people, no doubt all Hyugas, bustling around inside of the compound as the houses stretched far and wide inside of the gates. Some were purchasing things, some were talking to one another, but majority of the Hyugas worked around the compound with focused vigor. Hitomi led him and Hinata through the pathways of the compound, letting Naruto see all there was to see. He noticed that as he passed, they all looked at him. Some whispered among themselves while others gave him a curt nod before returning to whatever they were doing before. The lad was really surprised that none of them were attacking him or yelling at him for being inside of their walls. Maybe it was because he was with Hinata and Hitomi? He didn't know, but from all of the nods that were directed at him, he figured that they didn't think that he was all bad. When they arrived at a giant mansion that looked like a daimyo's house, Naruto's eyes widened. It looked just like a feudal lord's house that he had seen in posters when he walked by a magazine store. As he was admiring the mansion, he saw a man wearing a gray-white kimono with a faded green coat come out of the mansion. He had eyes like Hinata and Hitomi, but they were white. Papa. Hinata smiled as she let go of her mother's hands and ran up to her father. Hisashi smiled at her as he felt pride well up inside of him. So Hisashi was right after all. Hisashi thought as he kneeled down and caught his daughter into an embrace. Hello Hinata, did you behave at school today? Hi, Hinata said as her smile grew even wider. Oh wait, she wriggled out of her father's grip before she ran up to Naruto's side and gestured to him. Papa, this is my very first friend and his name is Naruto Uzumaki. He played with me a lot at school today. Hisashi raised a brow at the boy while Naruto teetered his weight back and forth on his feet. Hi, he said as he waved a hand at the man. He only got narrowed eyes which made him gulp in fear. Gee, he's really scary, Naruto thought as he averted his eyes from the man's cold gaze. He's much more scarier than all of the villagers combined. He felt his heart quicken when he heard the man stand up and give out a loud grunt. Hiyashi was observing his prey, his guest with hateful, calculating eyes. He knew about Naruto and his tenant. But he didn't hate the boy because of it. He hardly held any grudges and he had no reason to hate the boy since he had no power over it. The man knew of the boy's background, for the boy's father was his genin teammate when they were kids after all. No, he was glaring at Naruto because he was a boy. And he was with his daughter. And he was standing a little too close for comfort next to her. Hiyashi looked at the boy's appearance and stature. His pale eyes narrowed. Couldn't his daughter have chosen a friend that was a little more refined? Like a girl, for instance? "Hello, boy?" Hiyashi said after a long moment of silence. It almost sounded like a growl than a regular talking tone. Naruto felt himself sweat a ton of bullets as he watched the man glare at him intensely. He knew that pressure very well. If he didn't, he wouldn't be alive to this very day. Hinata's dad was emitting killer intent, and it was a lot of it. He tried to look away, but his eyes were glued onto the man's, fearing that if he did in fact look away, that the Hyuga standing right there in front of him would kill him on the spot. "Well then, let's go inside, shall we?" Hitomi said, breaking the two from their stares and glares, although it left Naruto feeling very unnerved. The Hyuga matriarch suddenly grabbed her husband by the ear as she pulled him inside. "Kids, you go inside and wait in the dining room. Hiyashi, a word please." Naruto was sitting on his knees on a pillow as he waited for his food to arrive. He was currently sitting with Hinata, Hitomi and Hiyashi, who also brought his brother Hizashi and his son Neji. Naruto thought that the two newcomers were very strange compared to the other Hyuga that lived here. Hizashi was the complete opposite of his brother Hiyashi, but they were identical twins. It freaked the whiskered boy out to no end. On one hand, Hizashi was really nice to him, on the other, Hiyashi was very cold and mean towards Naruto. Hizashi had a sense of humor. Hiyashi didn't. Hizashi liked Naruto, and Hiyashi didn't. But what they both did have in common were that they were heads of the two houses, which scared Naruto even more, knowing that Hiyashi was the head of the Hyuga clan and Hinata was basically a princess. And they both really liked Hinata. Remember, Naruto doesn't exactly know what love is, which made Naruto really happy for his friend. Now Neji Hyuga, he was like a mixture between Hiyashi and Hizashi. Neji was mainly quiet when Naruto and Hinata talked, but added his input on things with a stern and clipped voice. The older boy did manage to make Naruto uncomfortable, but the blonde preferred him over Hiyashi any day. But Neji did have this really kind side when Hinata spoke to him. Sure, he did berate her into never calling him Big Brother Neji, but mostly he was really nice. Neji, on the other hand, viewed Naruto differently than the Uzumaki viewed him. Neji thought that Naruto was very interesting, yet obnoxious at the same time. Naruto seemed to always speak his mind when Hinata, Hitomi, Hizashi, or himself asked him something, and the boy had bucket loads of confidence that seemed to practically ooze off of him. But when Hiyashi asked him something, the young lad seemed to quietly answer him while adding, "Sir," at the end of every sentence. Other than that, Neji thought that Naruto was a little strange, a bit too hyperactive, but he seemed reliable. Not only that, but he seemed to fill his surrogate sister, which he will never mention to anyone else, with a lot more confidence than she normally had. Sure, she had seemed to stutter around him, but it was slowly receding, if just by a little bit. All in all, Neji viewed the boy to being an acceptable resource for the near future, and he seemed to treat Hinata well and liked her very much. And the Hyuga boy didn't know why, but he seemed to consider the whiskered boy to be a worthy adversary in the near future. If they ever fought, of course. The chattering stopped once the double doors from the kitchen swung open, revealing a few chefs strolling out with some carts that had white blankets over a few lumps that were under it on each cart. The chefs yanked the white blankets off and proceeded to placing the dishes on the long table. Once everything was in place, the chefs removed the silver coverings of the platters and brought the coverings with them as they strolled their carts away back into the kitchen. "Whoa!" Naruto shouted as he looked at the spread. It was beautiful. All of the dishes were cooked to perfection and were made with elegance and careful decoration. He thought Hinata's bento box was good, but this was heaven. It had everything. Soba, udon, sushi, rice balls, rice porridge, everything. Naruto nearly cried tears of joy when he had an empty plate, courtesy of Hinata, set down in front of him along with chopsticks. Naruto gulped down his saliva that wanted to come out of his mouth and quickly grabbed his chopsticks. He snapped it in half and began to quickly fill his plate with fast and quick reflexes. In 3 seconds flat, his plate was filled and he had a goofy grin that was smacked across his face. He clapped his hands together as his eyes squinted in that infamous fashion as a bit of drool dribbled out of the corner of his lip. "Itadakimasu." He shouted and lifted a large piece of meat over his mouth with his chopsticks, and he was about to gobble it down when he noticed that everyone was staring at him. They all sweat dropped once they saw the boy about to inhale a large piece of meat within the matter of seconds. Well, that was everyone except Hyuga, of course. The man was glaring at Naruto instead, appalled that the boy had displayed such a vulgar act right in front of his very eyes. "Well, boy, haven't you ever considered the word manners before?" Hiyashi said with a snarky tone as he began to elegantly place food on his plate. Naruto felt his sweat being to drop as he realized that maybe the way he usually ate would be a bad example for people who were considered nobles or whatever. Naruto murmured his apologies as he set his meat back on his plate with his chopsticks. Once he saw everyone else eating, the blonde boy realized that he didn't have manners like them whatsoever. He looked at his plate with his infamous closed eyes as his bottom lip poked out as he tried to figure out his problem. "Okay, how do I do this?" As he stared at his food, thinking that it might give him an answer, his stomach began to grumble at not eating the delicious meal that was set out in front of him. He sighed as his grumblings grew louder. "Oh man, I'm really hungry right now." Naruto. Said boy looked over to see Hinata looking back at him. She had heard his stomach's pleas and felt bad that he didn't know what to do. As far as she knew, Naruto didn't have anyone to teach him anything. Like this, she explained as she tucked in her arms by her side, removed her elbows from the table, and started to chew her food with her mouth closed. "Oh," Naruto exclaimed as he bopped his fist into his hand. He copied Hinata and began to eat his food with tight and slow chews and with a closed mouth. It was new and uncomfortable for him at first, but he slowly got used to it as time progressed on. After he swallowed his morsel of sushi, he turned towards Hinata and gave her a lopsided grin. "Thanks Hinata, you really helped me out. I owe you one, believe it." Hinata blushed prettily and looked down at her meal as she began to play with her food for a bit. "Why you're welcome Naruto, I am glad I could help you." Naruto's grin turned even wider. Whenever he needed help, he knew he could always count on Hinata for being there in his time of need. The two continued eating, but also began chatting as they did so. Hiyashi was not pleased. His left eyebrow twitched in annoyance as he sat in the dining room alone with his wife, Hitomi Hyuga. Hizashi had turned in for the night and Neji went to use the restroom, leaving Hinata leading Naruto to her room so she could show the boy what it looked like and meet his other little daughter, Hanabi Hyuga. And the person responsible for that order was his own wife. Not to get him wrong, he loved his wife, he really did, but sometimes she did things that made him question her. Not that it was annoying, it was actually endearing. He always loved how mysterious Hitomi was, and it only made the clan head want to find out more about his wife. Even if they had been married for several years now. But tonight, he did not find his wife's antics endearing or amusing. She had told him that she wanted to let Hinata and Naruto get closer so they could form a greater bond of friendship. Too bad he wasn't an idiot and saw right through her plans. He knew that she wanted the boy and his beloved daughter to get much more mutual per se. Hiyashi sighed and grabbed his beautifully designed gray teacup. The cup was crafted so that its body had folds, and it was decorated with a beautiful marble that wrapped around the cup like a long vine. "Hitomi, my love, I know what you are implying. But Hinata cannot be courted by that boy. Sure he is the heir to the Namikaze and Uzumaki thrones, but I just don't see Hinata being with him." Hitomi harumphed as she folded her arms. An idea suddenly popped in her head, a mischievous idea. "Oh, I understand dear." Hiyashi sighed in relief and began to drink his tea. "But I think our little Hinataheim will be devastated. After all, she does have quite the crush on little Naruto after all." Hiyashi's eyes widened and his tea sprayed out of his mouth as he spluttered it out. He suddenly rounded on his wife who looked at him innocently. What?" he screamed. "Hiyashi, I know you had a big grudge match with Minato when you guys were kids." And I know that you are very protective of our daughters, but don't you think you're being a little too harsh on Naruto? She stopped to sip her tea before continuing once more. Naruto Uzumaki is not Minato Namikaze, dear. With his life being this bad already, having another person scorning him without him knowing for what reason, is like slicing his heart with a kunai. Please, just give him a chance to prove himself to you, and let him be happy with Hinata. Hiyashi calmed down after hearing his wife's words. He didn't want to admit it, but he knew she was right. Naruto was not in fact Minato, because he was just a child and the two of them were complete opposites anyway. Besides the blonde spiky hair and the blue eyes. Hiyashi sighed as he ran a hand through his long, dark brown hair. He rubbed his temples for a bit before speaking again. Yes, I guess you are right, my sweet. I will give the boy a chance, but if he does anything to harm Hinata, so help me all. Hiyashi, Hitomi warned. Hiyashi cringed before coughing to regain his composure. He loved his wife and she was very gentle, but at times, she scared the living daylights out of him. Sorry, I won't harm the boy, yet. He muttered the last part so his wife wouldn't hear him. Hitomi smiled and clapped her hands with happiness. Splendid, now we just have to convince the elders. You really think those old fools would let a boy of Naruto's stature into a pretentious compound such as the Hyuga? Hiyashi mumbled as he yet again began to rub his temples. No, but we do have a solution that will undoubtedly make them see in our favor. Hitomi snickered with a hand against her mouth to hide her laughter. With Hinata and Naruto, Hinata was busy leading the whiskered boy to her room. As she dragged him along, her mind was in complete overdrive. She had never in her life brought anyone outside of the Hyuga clan into her room. Well, besides Mr. Dai of course. But she had never, ever, in a million years, would have even thought of bringing a boy into her room. She had heard that bringing boys into girls' rooms were only for grown-ups, and maybe teenagers too. Hinata? Said girl ignored the voice. What was she going to do? She knew that she was just going to show the blonde her room and maybe play for a while, but it still didn't calm the little girl's heart rate any lower. Why did she feel this way? Hinata, eep. The brunette jumped and turned to look back at Naruto. He was panting, if only a little bit, and he had a confused expression on his face as he stared back at her. Why yes and Naruto? Hinata stammered as she looked at him with confusion and a hint of fright. Can you slow down a bit? You're going too fast and you're hurting my wrist, ya know? Naruto said as he started to rub an open spot that Hinata's hand didn't cover on the wrist she was holding on to. Hinata blushed as Naruto brushed his hand against hers unknowingly. She gave out a shrill squeak and yanked her hand away from his. Naruto looked at her, confused, but she quickly faced forward and clasped her hands against her thumping heart. I am sorry Naruto. Please forgive me? Hinata asked as she hung her head, thinking that he'll probably never talk to her again. But the whiskered child just grinned and put a hand on her shoulder. Don't sweat it Hinata, it was just an accident. And besides, I forgive you anyway, believe it. He said and gave her a thumbs up in his nice guy pose. Hinata blushed a bit harder but smiled nonetheless. She nodded at him and gave him a tap on the shoulder. If you still want to join me, I can show why you my little sister Hanabi. She's really cute and she's the sweetest bee baby you'll ever meet. Cool, Miss Hitomi did talk a lot about Hanabi anyway. I want to see what she looks like. Naruto smiled and this time, he grabbed her wrist and dragged the young heiress along. I don't know what it is but, Hinata thought as she looked at the back of Naruto's spiky blonde hair. There's something about him that's really nice to be around. He feels really warm. And as the brunette stared, she blushed as she continued to admire the boy in front of her, without him even knowing. After a few minutes of walking aimlessly in the main branch's huge tatami-matted hallways, Hinata Hyuga and Naruto Uzumaki had finally made it to their destination. Hinata slid open the tatami-decorated door, and walked inside with Naruto right behind her. They were met with a baby blue painted room that had drawing and pictures that were taped to the walls. It was roomy and comfortable unlike the regular rooms of the main branch's house. They were always plain and dull. The two heard a yawn followed by a few giggles. Naruto was confused whereas Hinata was elated and she smiled as she quickly made it over to the white crib that was placed near a wall and was close to Hinata's bed. The brunette held onto the crib's bars as she got on her tippy toes to view the little babe that was in the crib. Hanabi was only a few months old and she was very small. She was wearing a uni pajama wear that was the color gray. She had short, silky brown hair, and white eyes just like their dad, Hiyashi. Hanabi was a chubby baby, and she always had this small constant blush that was always on her cheeks. Hanabi giggled once she saw Hinata and she reached out her tiny hands towards her sister while her little feet thrashed about in excitement. No one knew why, but Hinata and Hanabi had this special bond they developed since the day Hanabi was born. It seemed that the two could always sense when the other was near, and it made them smile once they were in close contact. Usually it is the mother who is more attached to the baby than the other family members, but in this case, it is Hinata who is more attached to Hanabi than anyone else. Majority of the time, Hanabi would sleep with Hinata if the babe didn't want to be in her crib at night. Hinata smiled warmly at her baby sister and poked out a single finger for the little Hyuga to grab. Hanabi writhed around a bit, but she finally took hold of her finger and began giggling happily. Hinata giggled also, but then she realized that someone was missing from this picture. Hinata looked behind her and saw Naruto still standing at the room's entrance. Naruto? Hinata said as she looked at the boy quizzically. What are you doing over there? Aren't you going to come and see Hanabi? Naruto blinked in surprise. Wait, you mean I can see the baby? The boy was never allowed by others to see their babies whenever the blonde walked down the street. They always told him that demons like him would taint a baby's innocence and corrupt them with his presence. So Naruto had never really interacted with one before. Hinata sensed his discomfort and tried to put him at ease with a reassuring smile. It's okay, Naruto. You can come over and play with Hanabi. She won't be bite. When she noticed that he still wouldn't move, she looked at him sadly and sighed. She figured the reason why the whiskered boy was so nervous was because of what the villagers had done to him. And it seemed to revolve around babies in this case. The young heiress was really beginning to get annoyed by the citizens of Konoha now. Hinata wriggled her finger out of Hanabi's tight grasp, which disappointed the babe, and she started to bawl, but was silenced when Hinata smiled at her. Don't worry, Hanabi, your big sister will be back shortly. So please do not worry. Hanabi tilted her head, but started to clap her hands and smile at Hinata nonetheless. Hinata smiled and turned around and started to make her way towards Naruto. She took a hold of his hand, which made her blush horribly, and she began to lead him towards Hanabi. Hinata, wait. Naruto stammered as he let his feet drag along the floor. He felt really uncomfortable now, like he felt as if he was going to make Hinata's sister explode if she looked at him. But it seemed Hinata didn't care and she actually wanted him to meet her sister. No, Naruto, Hinata said as she now used both of her hands to pull him along. I really want you to meet Hanabi. I can know that the villagers make you feel bad, and I don't know for what reason, but why you aren't hated here, because you're a really nice person and you're my very first friend. So please, trust me enough so that you don't feel uncomfortable. That speech made Naruto shocked beyond belief. Her words hit home and it made tears sprinkle in his eyes. He cried silently and wiped them away before Hinata could see them. Although, Hinata had very sharp eyes and she could see he was trying to wipe away his tears of joy. It made her happy to know that she made the blonde feel accepted when no one else would. No, I am not gonna cry anymore, he said as he started to sniff as more tears escaped and began to roll down his cheeks. His shoulders began shaking and Hinata let him go. He used both of his hands to wipe his tears, but the salty rivers still managed to flow down his cheeks. He couldn't take it anymore and he started to bawl as he cried openly. He cried for joy, he cried for pain. He cried for loss, and he cried for sadness. He cried for loneliness, but he cried for acceptance as well. For the first time in his life, he finally had a friend who accepted him for him. It seemed that she saw through all of his flaws, through all of his mistakes and goofiness and false happiness. She saw through it all and found out that underneath all of the macho acts, was a person who was scared, alone, and felt vulnerable. Hinata hated to see him in this broken state and started to cry along with him. Before she knew what she was doing, Hinata ran up to him and hugged the lone Uzumaki. Naruto widened his eyes at first, but then he wrapped his arms around her, held her tight against him, and cried even harder. He really needed this. And with Hinata, the blonde lad felt as though he could tell her anything and everything. Hanabi joined in on the chorus of wails, making the sounds of their suffering resound around the room in harmony. After a few more minutes of crying, Hinata stopped and let Naruto cry a little longer on her shoulder. She rubbed his back as she tried to soothe away his pain, his loss, and especially his loneliness. After he was finished, he let go of her slowly and wiped away his tears with his arm. "Aha, sorry about that, Hinata," Naruto said as he put on a shy smile with his eyes red and puffy. "I didn't mean to soak your shirt or anything. Heh." He looked down at his shoes with shame and slight embarrassment. Hinata waved it off and let go of him with a huge wave of disappointment washing down on her. She ignored it for now and tended to more important matters at hand. It's okay na Naruto. It's good to see cry once in a while. It's not a bad thing or anything. Everyone does it." Really? Naruto looked up at her astonished. She just nodded and smiled at him with a little amusement. "Even your old man?" Now at that question, Hinata had to think. She had never seen her father cry before, at least, not in front of her. But she did remember her mother saying that when she had said yes to her father's marriage proposal, he did cry a little for joy. "Why yeah, at least, that's what Mama T told me." Hinata replied with a little shrug. She continued to pull him along until they reached Hanabi's crib. The baby looked like she was going to fall asleep from all of her crying, but she instantly perked up once she saw Hinata again. She smiled and began thrashing her little limbs around. Hello Hanabi. It's nice to see you again too." Hinata giggled and she unhooked the latch that kept the bars up on each side, and she pulled down on the bars until it was down enough so that Hinata could reach out and touch Hanabi without restrictions. The brunette reached and picked up the brunette, struggling as she did so. Her mother had given her permission to hold Hanabi whenever she wanted to, and it made the two girls very happy that they could both be in even more contact with each other. Hinata was happy, yes, but she wasn't happy that Hanabi was half her weight and it made it difficult for her to carry her places without wobbling. Hanabi giggled and latched onto her sister like a koala to a eucalyptus tree, which helped Hinata move around and carry her better, but it didn't help that her weight hadn't changed. In fact, it seemed as though Hanabi had gained more weight than last time. The 6-year-old girl groaned as she carried Hanabi to the middle of the room. Naruto noticed Hinata's struggling and he felt his sweat drop. Do you need some help, Hinata?" he asked her. Hinata thought about it for a moment before answering. Why yes please. If you would be so kind as to get Hanabi's baby blanket and spread it out for us. That would be a huge help to me." Naruto blinked but shrugged anyway. He looked around in the crib until he saw a dark purple blanket. He grabbed it, ran over to Hinata, and quickly spread it on the floor in front of them. Hinata got on her knees and gently laid Hanabi on her belly on the middle of the blanket while Hinata and Naruto took up either sides of the babe. Hanabi giggled and thrashed her limbs around again with happiness. It looked like she was swimming if you thought about it. Hinata and Naruto laughed and Hinata began to play with her sister as she lay next to her. After a few minutes of playing, Hinata was letting Hanabi suckle and teeth on her finger as the little one had it in a death-tight grip. Naruto was looking at Hinata confused, expecting the girl to cry out in pain. Instead, the Hyuga was just giggling and smiling at her sister. "Doesn't it hurt?" he asked. It was her turn to look at him in confusion. Doesn't what hurt, and Naruto?" she said with a raised eyebrow. "Ya no, Hanabi biting on your finger. Doesn't it hurt?" Hinata blinked but then she smiled at him. She figured that the boy didn't know anything about a baby and its growth. No, Naruto. It doesn't hurt because Hanabi is just teething on my finger." Naruto tilted his head. "Teething? What's that?" Teething is when a baby starts to bite and suck on things because its teeth are starting to grow in. She suddenly heaved Hanabi up so the little Hyuga sat in her sister's lap and Hinata gently stretched Hanabi's cheeks so Naruto could have a better look at in her mouth. The blonde boy leaned in closer and saw something white protruding out of little Hanabi's mouth and he realized that it was a tooth that was growing in. His eyes grew wide as he grinned hugely. "Whoa, that's pretty cool." Hinata giggled and a soft blush graced her cheeks. She suddenly came up with an idea and let go of Hanabi's cheeks, much to the baby's relief. Hey Naruto? Yeah? Do you want to hold Hanabi?" she asked as she lifted Hanabi up and held her out to him. He backed away a little when Hanabi giggled and started to reach out to him. The whiskered boy began to sweat nervously as he stared at the baby in front of him. Could he hold Hanabi? Would their mother get mad? Would he taint her? As if she could read his mind, Hinata spoke up. Don't worry Naruto, I'm sure why you'll do just fine holding Hanabi. But, he was cut off when Hinata held Hanabi close and walked over to the confused boy. She gently placed the baby in his arms and directed one hand to hold the small of Hanabi's neck and Hinata then led the other to hold the small of Hanabi's back. Naruto began to feel much more nervous but Hinata kept his arms close to his sides so Hanabi would be much more comfortable in his embrace. Naruto sweated as Hanabi looked at him with big, curious white eyes. He smiled down at her but it was a nervous smile. He had absolutely no idea what he was supposed to do. He had never felt so lost in his young life. Here he was, holding another human in his hands, and he was sweating like a pig. Sure, Hanabi was heavy, but she was also very small and delicate and fragile and was supposed to be treated with care. Naruto did the exact opposite of those things and more. Why the hell was he holding a baby when he breaks more stuff in Konohagakure than a bandit does in 5 years? He suddenly felt movement on his right side and saw as Hinata stood up and began to walk away from him. Wait, where are you going Hinata? He asked, his voice almost shouting at her. He felt scared that if Hinata left, something bad might happen to him or worse, Hanabi. Hinata nearly flinched at Naruto's tone, but realized that the blonde was just scared and had never experienced this sort of thing before. So she gave him a reassuring smile that made his heart go at ease. Don't worry Naruto, I am just getting my stuff be bear. That's all. It's just on the bed, I'm not going anywhere. And with that, the Uzumaki sighed with relief and watched Hinata quickly make her way over to her bed, grab something, and made her way back to them. Naruto watched as Hinata plopped back on her knees and hold out something in front of her. It was a big white bear that was nearly as tall as the both of them. Naruto is Hinata's height after all, and had really long arms that stopped at the bear's feet. He was missing an ear and had gray button eyes with a giant blue spot that was around one of them. Hinata just beamed at Naruto as she held out the bear towards Naruto and Hanabi. This is my stuffed bear, Mr. Dai. He's my very special animal friend and he's always been there for me. Hinata suddenly hugged the bear close to her and she grinned as she snuggled the animal's face. It shocked Naruto because Hinata doesn't really grin, as far as he knew. We go on a lot of adventures and beat up our really bad guys. Naruto just gave her a goofy grin while Hanabi giggled as she reached out for the bear. That's pretty cool. Hey, where's his ear? Hinata's grin suddenly flashed into a serious expression a half a second later. It was serious but it was cute at the same time. Of course, Naruto couldn't see that it was. He donated it to the Sickly Bear Society where sick bears get operations. Oh, Naruto nodded his head, also having a serious face on. He thought it was a logical and a well put out plan. I see, that's pretty smart, I know right? Hinata smiled but it dimmed down a bit as she was in deep thought. Naruto noticed this and was confused for a bit until he realized that something was wrong with his friend. Hey Hinata, he said as he frowned a little at her. Is everything alright? She didn't answer at first but suddenly her smile came back but this time it was gentle and held a bit of sadness in it. Naruto, can you please set Hanabi down on the blanket please? He didn't know what was happening but he complied to the heiress' wishes nonetheless. He slowly moved his hands so that it was under the baby's arms and he gently sat Hanabi down on her bottom. Hanabi giggled, thinking that this was a new game, until her vision was suddenly filled with white. Hinata had placed Mr. Dai in front of her with a remorseful, yet happy smile that was stretched upon her lips. Here you go Hanabi, Hinata said as she scooted the bear closer to the babe, he's yours now. I hope you like him and treat him well as I did. The baby Hyuga's eyes went wide before she started to wave her hands up and down in excitement. She reached for him, but she couldn't quite grab him. So in a fit of frustration, the baby girl leaned forward and fell on the bear, cushioning her fall. She giggled and reached a tiny hand towards the bear's hand that was a stub, brought it to her mouth, and began to teeth on it. It made the 6-year-olds smile with amusement, but it made Naruto confused as to why Hinata had given away her favorite bear. Hey Hinata? Hinata turned to look at him. Why yes Naruto? Why'd you give away Mr. Dai? I thought he was your favorite stuffed animal. He asked her quizzically and with a slightly tilted head. The brunette sighed as she watched her sister. I know, but I felt as though I was getting a little too old for tea toys. She began to rub Hanabi's back, making the girl giggle before going back to teething again. Quote ellipsis. And Hanabi L looks so happy, and she D doesn't have one, so I thought, maybe it's time I stop playing W with toys and give Hanabi one instead. The young heiress suddenly straightened up and stared determinedly at the spiky blonde boy. And besides, I'm the heiress of the Hyuga clan and I've got really big responsibilities now. So I won't have time to play what with my duties as the heiress and attending the Konoha Ninja Academy. Naruto squinted, his eyes closed as he stared at her. They were only 6 and lots of 6-year-olds had toys. But when she put it that way about her being the heiress of a He clan and also juggling ninja school, he guessed that she did have her hands full. And wouldn't, in fact, need toys. But he still thought that she would need one. You know, a little bedtime pal or something along those lines. Maybe I should get her one, he thought as he began to scratch the back of his head. At that thought, Naruto instantly perked up and a large grin tugged on his lips. Yeah, I'll get Hinata a stuffed animal so she won't feel sad anymore. That's a great idea, believe it. Don't worry, Hinata. Naruto beamed brightly at her while he patted his bicep. I'll take care of your problem. Leave everything to me, believe it. Hinata raised a brow, but she gave a small blush once she saw Naruto's burning gaze lock onto her timid one. She had no idea what was going on or what he was saying, but she felt happy that he was doing whatever it was just for her. Before she could reply, she suddenly heard Hanabi yawning. She looked down to see the baby making herself comfortable as her eyelids started to droop from her tiredness. Hinata smiled but blinked as she came up with an idea. Hey Naruto? See, can you do me an favor? Hinata asked as she turned towards him once more. He tilted his head a little but nodded nonetheless. Sure, what is it? See, can you lie down please? On your back? The shy girl asked as she began to gently tap her 2 index fingers together as a dark blush covered her cheeks and ears. She had no idea why that sentence sounded so foreign, but she wanted to try out something to help her friend get over his fear of babies. Naruto blinked slowly at first, but then he nodded and laid on his back with his arms stretched out widely. Hinata sighed in relief, but knew her experiment wasn't over yet. She gently picked up Hanabi, who snapped her eyes open with surprise and curiosity. Walked over to the stretched out Naruto, and slowly but carefully placed the fragile baby on the destructive boy's chest. Naruto was surprised at the new weight on his body, but once he saw what it was, his surprise instantly turned into fright. Hinata had put Hanabi right on top of him. The one who violated people's property, destroyed things, and trespassed on private grounds regularly. He was about to protest, but Hinata shushed him with a sharp shish, with a single finger to her lips. She pointed at the bundle and Naruto lifted his head a little to see Hanabi lying on her tummy while she yawned loudly. Her eyes fluttered closed before she brought out a tiny thumb and began to suckle on it. Okay, the blonde admitted that Hanabi did look cute, but he was very uncomfortable that the baby had to sleep on top of him. Couldn't she have slept on Hinata instead? But whenever he pleaded whispers to her to get the sleeping babe off of him, the brunette would just sigh and shake her head. So Naruto grumbled in annoyance as he took matters into his own hands. He squirmed underneath Hanabi, making the babe get agitated as she clutched onto his shirt tighter to steady her ground. Naruto huffed and squirmed again, but this time it resulted in Hanabi wailing, making it a bad mistake. Naruto! Hinata yelled at him with her hands planted on her hips as she looked at him with a scowl and a light blush. It was his turn to get agitated as he rounded on Hinata. Well, you shouldn't have put her on me. I don't do well with babies. I was trying to make why you like babies. Hinata shot back. Well, your plan sucked, he retorted. Hinata held his annoyed gaze with her own before she sighed and gave up on it. She was about to pull the crying Hanabi off of the blonde lad when she suddenly came up with an idea. Hinata smiled softly before she retracted her hands and folded them neatly into her lap as she sat on her knees. Naruto watched with relieved cerulean eyes as Hinata's hands started to make their way over to the wailing baby. But they suddenly stopped and then they disappeared back towards their owner. Naruto was about to question her when he was suddenly stopped by a voice. Dango, 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 a big Dango family. Naruto looked around for that voice. That voice. It held such a heavenly tune, and it was the sweetest voice Naruto had ever heard in his young life. Dango, 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 a big Dango family. When Naruto turned his head, his blues almost grew to the size of platters. It was Hinata. Hinata was that sweet voice. The young lad realized that Hinata was singing. He had never heard Hinata sing, he had just met her today for Pete's sake. The mischievous roasted Dango, the gentle bean jam Dango. The moon-viewing Dango is a bit of a dreamer. The sesame Dango always looks prim, the quadruplet-spitted Dango. Put all of them together to make a family of 100. As Naruto continued to hear Hinata's voice, he heard a tiny sigh that perturbed from his chest. He saw Hanabi's white eyes flutter as sleep began to overtake her. The baby Dango is always in the midst of happiness. The old Dango narrows his eyes. At that verse, Hanabi seemed to smile as Hinata sang, "Baby Dango," before the babe yawned once more before suckling on her thumb again and drifting off to sleep. The chummy Dango hold their hands together and make a big, round ring. They build a town on the Dango planet and everyone laughs together. The rabbit waves from the big moon in the sky. It takes all the happy and sad things and rounds them up. Naruto suddenly felt his eyelids get heavy, and before he knew it, he began to yawn as well. He stretched his arms up like a cat, careful not to disturb the sleeping Hanabi, before his arms plopped back down, with one draping over the brunette Hyuga child. Dango, 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 a big Dango family. Dango, 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 a big Dango family. He didn't want to sleep, but he soon found out that his vision was slipping him as he continued to listen to Hinata's sweet, melodious, and soothing voice. He felt that all of the insecurities and hurtfulness of the world suddenly vanished, and all that was left was a big fluffy cloud of softness that engulfed his entire being. Dango, 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 a big Dango family. Hinata smiled warmly as she watched Hanabi drift asleep before watching Naruto try to fight off the tiredness a little more, before his slumber finally caught him and he was snoring softly as he dreamed. She didn't know why, but she liked watching Naruto sleep. It was kind of cute how he would sometimes twitch while mumbling in his sleep. Hinata yawned and felt herself get lulled by her own song. She groggily climbed next to Naruto before she lowered herself down and laid next to him and her sister. Dango, 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 a big Dango family? And after the last verse of the song, Hinata succumbed to her sleepiness and fell into a deep, blissful slumber. With Hiyashi and his wife Hitomi, the two powers were briskly making their way towards the Hyuga elders' quarters. They had been summoned just shortly after they were finished talking about their plan of Naruto's staying. They knew that this was going to happen sooner or later, but they had never expected it to be so soon. It's amusing how everything works out in this way, isn't it, dear? Hiyashi asked his wife with his hands neatly tucked into his sleeves. Hitomi just laughed and also put away her hands into her sleeves. Yes, but it makes everything interesting all the more. Wouldn't you agree, my little Shishi? She asked in a flirtatious manner. Hiyashi blushed as he was momentarily caught off guard, resulting in him stumbling in his strides for a moment. He coughed before he regained his regal composure, although his blush never left his face. He hated it when his wife would do that, although he would never admit that he secretly liked it when she called him she. Even if she was his wife, he still had boundaries. "I told you not to call me that, Hitomi," Hiyashi said in a clipped but gentle tone. Hitomi sighed before she suddenly looped her arms into his. "But she, we used to call each other nicknames when we were dating. Why don't you want to do it now?" She groaned dramatically and teetered back, making Hiyashi catch her. Hiyashi was shocked at his wife's behavior. Sure had done this a while back, but why now? They were going to meet the elders soon and needed to show up with the stature of feudal lords in their presence. There was no room for error in their eyes and everything must be perfect. "Hitomi, why are you acting in such a way? This has not happened for quite some time and you know it." He sighed before he picked her back up on her feet. "For what reason do you act so childish?" Hitomi turned around in her husband's arms and placed her soft, pale hands on his chest. "Hiyashi, I just want to rekindle the love that has begun to dim between us. Seeing our daughter interact with that boy has made me realize that our love needs much more attention." She blushed as she grabbed her husband's hands and placed them on her hips, and she then linked her hands behind the clan head's neck as she pressed herself closer to him. So maybe we could partake in the activities of the bonding of two mates later. Hiyashi's mouth went slightly agape as his blush started to spread across his face until it turned completely red. If you thought Hinata had gotten her excessive blushing from her mother, well, you were wrong. It was from her father. The Hyuga clan leader immediately let go of his wife's hips and grabbed her wrists and put them back to her side, much to her disappointment. Hiyashi put a hand over his mouth as an eyebrow twitch in embarrassment, with his blush never leaving his face. "Why you want?" he said in a slightly muffled voice. "To do that, so soon?" Hitomi blushed harder as she smiled and began playing with her fingers. "Well, yes? Is that so wrong?" Hiyashi's ears began to scorch as he sighed at his wife's naivety. Even after all these years, his wife remained innocent. Which was a blessing as well as a curse. "Well, no, not really, but you must realize that you just had Hanabi not too long ago, my dear." Hitomi just raised a brow at her husband's shyness as he dodged the question she had asked him earlier. She decided to put more pressure on him. "Yes, I know, but I'm not saying that we have another child. I'm just saying that I want a night of lovemaking with you. Don't you want to do it too, she?" Now she had him. Hiyashi stiffened as he looked right into his wife's eyes. He was nervous and sweat was beginning to formulate on his forehead. His blush turned into a nice crimson color as he replayed his wife's words. She had said it so plainly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Which it wasn't. It was the most embarrassing thing in the world to say. I, Hiyashi began but found himself tongue-tied. He stared at his wife for a few moments before regaining himself as he took in a deep breath. Can I answer this a little bit later?" Hitomi looked at him with an annoyed expression before she proceeded onwards towards where the elders resided. "Fine, but I hope you answer soon, Hiyashi." Said man gave out a sigh of relief. He was off the hook now, but he knew it was only for a little while before his wife tried more drastic measures. The last time she tried that, Hanabi ended up being created. Hiyashi thought as hung his head with slight shame. He couldn't believe that he had lost to his wife of her game of seduction so easily. That really put a damper on his pride back then. So as his eyes flitted up to glance at the matriarch's backside, he groaned before he covered his pale eyes with a hand. This is going to be a long night. The husband and wife were sitting on their knees elegantly as they faced the 7 Hyuga elders with impassive and unreadable expressions, as did the elders too. The air was thick with so much tension that it could have choked a pig. It was a full 5 minutes before an elder started the meeting off. "I assume that you know the reason you were summoned here?" one asked. Hiyashi gave a curt nod. "Naruto Uzumaki, correct?" "Yes." Another hissed vehemently. "Why did you allow that tainted being into the Hyuga clan's walls, Hiyashi?" Before the clan head could answer, he was cut off by his wife. "The reason being, elders, is because of Naruto's heritage." "His heritage?" an elder repeated with narrowed eyes. "Preposterous. That thing has no heritage. He is just an unworthy orphan that deserves to be among his kind." Hitomi narrowed her lavender eyes as she could clearly hear the hate in the elderly Hyuga's voices. There was no mistaking their disdain and hatred of Naruto for something he had no control over. Actually, Naruto Uzumaki is the heir to the Uzumaki and Namikaze thrones. This caused an uproar of whispers that the elders emitted amongst themselves. They turned to whisper in the other ears before it quieted down for a moment and the higher-ups regained their composure. Namikaze? Just who were the boy's parents? Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki. Hitomi replied, and again, more whispers ignited among the elders. Hitomi smiled inwardly as she was very satisfied by the progress. The elders were debating, yes, but they all seemed very confused and would constantly contradict each other instead of readily agreeing with each other. If all goes according to plan, Naruto just might have a second home in the Hyuga clan. The elders on the other hand were debating whether or not Hitomi was lying or not. The boy admittedly did have the uncanny resemblance to the late 4th Hokage, but he also had a few differences from the man that matched his mother's profiles very well. The Hyuga elders did know of Kushina Uzumaki, how could they not? She was known far and wide as the red-hot-blooded habanero, and she was friends with their matriarch as well. Whenever Kushina came over, the Hyugas would constantly be on guard, fearing her of her short fuse and enormous temper, and her monstrous strength. And since they had seen Naruto plenty of times before he was introduced into the Hyuga clan, they could very well see that the boy had some of Kushina's looks as well as majority of her traits and behaviors. The elderly Hyuga tried to find loopholes around this, but found out they could not for logical reasons that the boy's heritage was that, in fact, it did match, and the Hyuga elders had heard plenty of times before from the Sandaime that Naruto was the late 4th Hokage's legacy, further proving the boy's background. They looked at each other once more before facing the clan head and the matriarch with stern, yet frustrated eyes. How will this benefit us, the Hyuga? Hitomi nearly jumped up for joy at the approval, but managed to quash her excitement and joy for a moment. Well, for one, Hinata and Naruto has seemed to forge a bond with each other. If we can further push them together and unlock Naruto's abilities, then his power of the Uzumaki and Namikaze will greatly be in our favor. The elders all nodded, liking where this conversation was heading. Yes, if Naruto managed to unlock his clan's powers and build a strong relationship with the Hyuga through Hinata, then the clan would have an unstoppable force that would be in their control. Not to mention that they would also have the nine-tailed fox under their command as well. Hiyashi spoke up for the second time in the conversation. So we have proposed that my brother and I train him so he can be able to unlock his full potential sooner than the Ninja Academy ever would. This caused a few anger shouts to come from the elders. So you're saying that you want to teach an outsider the way of the Hyuga? Heavens no, Hiyashi explained with a wave of his hand, my brother and I will train him, yes, but we'll help him develop a new fighting style technique that isn't of the Hyuga. This greatly calmed the constant buzzing of the Hyuga elders as they relaxed a little. A few whispered amongst themselves before calming once again. We, the elders of the Hyuga clan, accept your terms. The boy may be allowed inside the Hyuga clan's walls as a disciple and an associate of the Hyuga. He will train here every day to hone his skills that will provide usefulness to us, and we give permission for his bond with our heiress to grow. Hitomi and Hiyashi gave a slight bow to the elders and were dismissed shortly afterwards. After Hiyashi slid the door closed and began walking with his wife, Hitomi began to cheer silently as she hugged her husband and he returned the embrace. I can't believe it, Hiyashi. We have done it. Little Naruto can stay with us. Hitomi beamed with tears of joy sprinkling their eyes. Hiyashi gave out an annoyed grunt. He had better not be a deadweight. I hate slackers. Hitomi just laughed and pulled her husband along. I know that you like boy too, she. No, let us go spread the good news to them. I bet our little Hinataheim will be elated. Once the two adults made it Hinata's room, they realized they were too late. Hinata, Hanabi and Naruto were all lying on the floor as they slept. Naruto had his limbs spread out far and wide from his body while little Hanabi rested snugly on the boy's chest. Hinata was on the right side of Naruto and she was using one of his arms as a pillow while she slept on her left side with her knees tucked slightly into her. Naruto was snoring loudly with a snot bubble rising and falling as he breathed in and out through his nose. Hiyashi was thoroughly annoyed that both of his daughters seemed to like the boy enough that they slept on him with no problem. He was equally annoyed that the Uzumaki was a loud and heavy sleeper. He was starting to regret his decisions of allowing the boy into his home. Hitomi, on the other hand, was amused at the scene in front of her. She quickly got the blanket from Hinata's bed and gently placed it over the three. Hinata and Hanabi twitched, but they remained in their dreams, while Naruto didn't move a muscle as he continued to snore mumbling, "Give me back my ramen you creep," a few times in his slumber. Hitomi quietly slid the door closed with a soft click. Hiyashi turned away and started to walk towards their bedroom. Well, I guess that settles that, although I would be a little more comfortable if the boys slept in a different room than with our daughters. He grumbled, but he suddenly felt a tug and he was suddenly turned around, courtesy of his wife. Oh no you don't, you haven't answered my question. And besides, she purred as she pulled on her husband's collar, yanking him down enough so that her mouth was near his ear. Quote ellipsis. The children are asleep and there will be no interruptions tonight. So what do you say, my sweet? Hiyashi blushed and started to stammer horribly. Hitomi just smirked and started to drag her poor man along towards their bedroom. I see you still have no answer. Well, I can fix that with one of my little games. She dear? A few days later, Naruto was busy at his home, washing himself up. the clan head of the Hyuga clan, or known as Hiyashi Hyuga, and recently told Naruto that he will be training with him, his brother Hisashi Hyuga, his best friend Hinata Hyuga, and occasionally Neji Hyuga as well. The blonde was elated that he was finally getting some real training instead of the academy's slow drills and teachings, but he was a bit peeved that he had to wake up at 6 a.m. every single morning, every single day. Naruto yawned tiredly as he washed his blonde unruly hair slowly. It was 5:30 a.m. and it was early September. It was autumn, but it wasn't at all cold in Konohagakure. In fact, it was the exact opposite. Yes, the village hidden in the leaves did have autumn, but it always looked like summer whenever the cold season came. And it wasn't even cold at all in the land of fire. Naruto yawned again and turned the showerhead's knobs until the water ceased its flow. The 6-year-old boy climbed out of the shower slowly, grabbed an orange towel on the towel rack, and began to scrub himself dry. After that, he made his way towards his bedroom and looked around with his infamous closed eyes until he spotted his wardrobe. Almost as slow as a turtle, Naruto walked over to it and began sifting around until he found some suitable clothes. He found some and began to put them on. Naruto wore an orange hoodie vest with a blue undershirt, green shorts, black wristbands on each wrist, and blue sandals. Naruto, feeling a bit more awake now, quickly made his way over to the door and skipped his breakfast. Hitomi had told him that he needn't get any because she would provide that for him. He protested at first, but went along with it because he loved the Hyuga's cooking. Even if it wasn't as great as ramen. Alright, he beamed as he grinned. He reached for the door and turned the knob. Time to go. Before he could push open the door, his cerulean eyes caught something. There, on a round table, were green goggles that shined when the sun hit its lenses. Oh, I can't forget these. He snatched them up and put them on. Hinata bought me these after all. He smiled brightly as he recalled the memory.